IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I am in my southern, Ryan headquarters here in old Virginia Beach, Virginia. Going to be heading down to Raleigh, North Carolina tomorrow there's some event going on down there, Ryan, and I'm trying to remember Notre Dame. Number 10 Notre Dame plays at NC State tomorrow. First time I've been back since the Hurricane game in 2016 into Raleigh. So it's a big weekend for Notre Dame, Ryan. We've talked a lot about it this week. This is without question the first big test that Notre Dame is going to face this season. And we learned a lot about Notre Dame in the first two games, right? You can't control your opposition, but you can control how you handle playing that opposition. And Notre Dame did what you'd expect a top 10 team to do against Navy and Tennessee State. They absolutely dominated and did things that we haven't seen Notre Dame do since the 70s in some cases, in the 30s in other cases. So that's domination. But now things get real and we truly find out what kind of Notre Dame football team they have, because this is going to present Notre Dame with one of the biggest tests that they're going to face. It's the biggest test so far this season, and I think it's one of the 5 toughest games on the schedule this year when you consider all the different aspects of it, Ryan. This is going to be a very well-coached, quality NC State team that's got some very good NFL caliber talent at certain positions that Notre Dame is going to have to come to play and be ready for. So it's going to be a really, really big test for Notre Dame. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I think that for me, Brian, like as we kind of get into the breakdown, some things that Notre Dame has traditionally made their living off of, I think NC State can match that a little bit, right? I mean, the Lions are pretty strong on both sides of the football. They have an athletic quarterback as well, which we'll get into, which has given Notre Dame problems over the years in certain instances. So I think it's a tremendous challenge because, one, it's a good football team who has routinely won about 8-9 games over the last few years in the ACC volley team.
Yeah. Minimum 8 each. In 5 of the last 6 years, they've won at least 8 games in 5 of the last 6 years. Yes, to your point.
So they are a very competitive football team in a good conference in the ACC, a team that is also one of those pesky teams, right? Like that sometimes maybe they don't have the big time wide receiver, the big time skill position player, but they're always going to be built pretty much the same way. Physical defensive line, good offensive line, and they want to be able to kind of establish the momentum, but establish their pace of the football game is the biggest thing for me. So you're going down to Raleigh, you're playing against a good football team, a physical football team that wants to control how the game is played. So that's always going to be a challenge for Notre Dame, especially after coming off of 2 teams where there was no challenge to how you wanted to run the football game. Like Navy and Tennessee State had to play Notre Dame's game. NC State is going to try to now push back against it and say, no, buddy, you guys are coming to our house. You're going to have to play football our way and maybe to come out with a W. So there's going to be some back and forth there, I believe.
I don't think that Notre Dame fans as a whole appreciate how quality of an opponent this is. And I've dealt with it all week, and we're seeing it in the predictions now. If Notre Dame does to NC State what a lot of fans are predicting they're going to do score-wise, that is a tremendous performance. And we're seeing like 42-13, 42-10. Like, guys, this is a good football team. This is a very good football team. And can Notre Dame beat them? Of course. Should Notre Dame beat them? Of course. But as you said, Ryan, this is a team that is going to be a very game opposition for Notre Dame, and they're going to have to earn their victory. I mean, last year you talk about they lost 30-20 to Clemson, 24-9 to Syracuse, 21-20 to BC, 25-10 to Louisville, 16-12 to Maryland. This is not a team that's accustomed to going out and just getting dominated. The year before, they were a 9-3 team. They lost by 14 to Mississippi State, 24-10. Lost by 1 point to Miami, 31-10, and lost to Wake Forest, 45-42. Right. So in 2 years, this team is what their worst loss is 15 points in 2 full seasons. Right. This is a quality NC State football team. And there's no doubt about it. And Notre Dame's going to have to go handle their business, and they're capable of it. It just depends on what kind of level. Do they bring their B game? Do they bring their B plus game? Do they bring their A game? And that's going to determine the outcome.
And Brian, I think that when you have a team like this NC State team, because yes, there's talent, but NC State's going to make their living off of being a physically durable team, right? A team that is going to continue to come after you, not let up, throw waves at you. And for that type of team, I think that one of the more important things to have is great coaching, right? And Dave Doran has put together an incredible coaching staff of 2 very good, an offensive coordinator now with Robert and Ike that's come in this offseason, with Tony Gibson now continuing to just have this trend of really good defenses, NC State, a team that is going to have to win a lot of those grinded out type of football games a lot. You need those coaches that make good decisions in the biggest moments of the game. So Notre Dame's going to have to be on their P's and Q's, not only from a player perspective, but the coaches have to be up to snuff in this game as well.
I think Dave Dorn is a solid coach. I don't think he's a great coach, but he made some very strong hires, in my opinion, putting his staff together. This is to me the best staff he's had at NC State, and that's adds to the talent. It's going to be a very linebacker driven team, as we talked about all week, Ryan. Notre Dame's going to have to bring it. And speaking of that, let's dive into our keys to victory for Notre Dame, Ryan. And we're going to come up with 3 keys on both sides of the ball. There are general keys, be disciplined from a penalty standpoint. We'll actually get into turnover specifically because in this game it does mean something. Obviously starting fast. You don't want to fall behind on the road in bad weather against a team like this. Be smart on special teams. There's always those type of general keys that go into every game. But let's dive specifically into what Notre Dame needs to do to thrive in this game. And we're going to start with the offense. And this is an obvious one, but it's really deep and all-encompassing. And that is, number one, Notre Dame offensively has to control the line of scrimmage, right? I talked about this. I know you listened to it. I saw you in the chat yesterday during the midweek rundown. When you look at Sam Hartman against NC State, he's 1-2 overall against NC State. He's 0-2 in Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh, right? And last year they lost by 9. 3 years, his first year, 2020, they lost by 3. They've been competitive, but they haven't been able to get it done. And in the 2 games at Carter Finley, he's been sacked 10 times in those 2 games. And last year, Wake Forest ran for 17 yards. So you're just not going to beat them with that going on. If you're giving up 5 sacks, if you give up 5 sacks tomorrow and Saturday, I should say, if you give up 5 sacks on Saturday and Sam Hartman gets picked off 3 times because he's under duress the entire game, and if you can't run the football, you're going to get the same result that Wake Forest got. So part of the reason that Sam Hartman came to Notre Dame is because he will not have to deal with that. He's going to have a better defense. In the 3 games they played, the other team scored 39 points per game. You don't think we don't expect that to happen tomorrow or Saturday with this. But for him to have the support he needs to go do what he's going to do, they're going to have to do a better job, to me, up front. They have to control the line of scrimmage. So what does that mean, Ryan? It means run game. It means pass pro. It means discipline. It means taking the fight to NC State and playing clean football. That's going to be a huge key in this game.
Well, NC State's a very different defensive front this year, too, comparative to like last year, for instance, because last year they had Corey Durden, who was one of kind of their base ends, who was like a 6'5", 315 plus pound type of defensive end, right?
That was the kid that transferred in from Florida State, right?
Yeah, yeah. So he was a different type of what they have now. Now they have 2 kids in Davin Van and Savion Jackson, who are both like 6'2", 280, somewhere in that ballpark, right? Guys that are more penetration style players than holding point of attack. And I honestly think, and this is, just my opinion, obviously, kind of watching the film over the last couple of days, but CJ Clark is a much better football player than I initially thought at playing that nose position. 6'3".
He was a lot better against UConn than he was last year.
Yeah.
And now to fans, that might not mean anything, Ryan. Oh, it's UConn. But as you have said, and this was the surprise for me when I watched UConn play, I thought CJ Clark was much better than he was last year. But my big takeaway from that game, from the trench standpoint, is I was very impressed with how good the interior players, the center and the 2 guards, were for UConn. Yeah. And the one player that I thought thrived in that game was CJ Clark.
Yeah.
But UConn is very good up the middle, and that's been the inconsistent point for Notre Dame the first 2 games. At least it was against Tennessee State, was to play the guards. And if they don't play better than they did last week, Ryan, to your point, CJ Clark is because you talked about the shorter, undersized guys. CJ Clark's 6'3", 300 plus pounds.
Yeah, he's a bigger kid. Yeah. Well, and he does a lot of the dirty work. So a lot of him goes a little bit underappreciated, in my opinion, because he's not going to be a box score stuffer, right? Like, you're not going to see him with 10 tackles, 3 tackles for loss. But what you are going to see is that he might have a tackle for loss, but he's going to also allow guys like Peyton Wilson to run free and make a lot of plays, because he does a lot of the work against double teams, anchors, splits gaps from time to time. I think he's a very, very quality football player here in 2023. And then he's going to allow other guys like Savion Jackson and Davin Van to be more that penetration style player, because you can't have a 3-man front of just penetration players. You can't do that because that is where guys are going to get caught way too often, and that's where gaps are going to get displaced, and you're going to work up to the second level too consistently. You need a guy that is in the middle, can take up multiple blockers and allow players to be a little bit more aggressive, be a little bit more of one gap style. And that's what they have up front. They have two kids that are more, I'm going to attack. And then they have CJ Clark, who's a little bit of a wrecking ball in the middle. So I really think that there's going to be challenges here. Zeke Correll is a good football player. Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan have had a lot of good moments over the first two games. But the first game was a lot more impressive from the guard perspective for Notre Dame than it was in the second game.
Yeah.
So now with that up in competition, I mean, Pat Coogan and Bracco are going to need to be ready to handle a guy like CJ Clark if they're down blocking on him, for instance, right? Like this is not going to be a cakewalk. This is going to be a massive test. And we will know, I think, very early in this game is if Notre Dame defensively is ready to play, or if they are treading water a little bit, if they're getting gashed a little bit in the run game.
It's interesting seeing some of the comments, Ryan, and I think it speaks to this particular matchup. So here was a question from, for example, Southern Highlander. He says, with Notre Dame, with NC State allowing 6.2 yards per rush against UConn, do you see them loading the box to stop Estime and company, or will they focus more on taking away the receivers to shut down Hartman? This is the thing. Look, if you watch that game, they didn't average 6.2 yards per play against them. They, as far as like the consistency, the way it's portrayed, they had one rush for 71 yards that went for a touchdown. Yep. On the other 25 carries, they went for 3.6 yards per play. Here's why that matters. You say, well, that play counts. Yeah, that play does count. But there's a reason that I always, whenever I talk about the need for Notre Dame to be efficient and explosive, there is I'm not doing that just like, well, randomly, let's go with efficiency first because F becomes before X. It's because efficiency has to precede explosiveness. And UConn had a 71-yard touchdown run. But they had, 270 yards of offense, 14 points. That's it. Because one big play doesn't make it. It's got to be the consistency of controlling the line of scrimmage. Yep. UConn for the first series and a half did okay, right? They moved the ball. NC State settled down, much like Notre Dame has their first two games, where they kind of give a little in that first series, fill the other team out, limit the big plays, and then shut them down. That's what NC State did. UConn was not able to consistently control the line of scrimmage. That's why they struggled to protect the quarterback and get the points that they needed to win that football game. And to your point, Ryan, is the interior of the line is going to be important because if they are unable to play consistent football, we're going to see too many negatives. You have to limit negatives in this game. They gave up 6 tackles for loss against Tennessee State. Can't happen this week. Number one. Number two, you look at the run game. The way that Tennessee or NC State uses their linebackers, they're going to play very fast, aggressive. Now, they lost 2 really good linebackers off last year's team. The kids that are replacing them are not stiffs. These are quality athletes as well. They're going to attack downhill. They're going to trigger them and run stunts on early downs because the one thing that Southern Highlander said that is absolutely spot on is they are going to load the box and force Notre Dame. They are going to, especially if Notre Dame does as much 12 personnel as we saw the first 2 games. They are going to condense the box, get their safeties down because they trust their corners enough on the outside, especially against the Notre Dame receivers who have not proven yet that they are a big-time unit. They've been good, but that's it, just good. You know, they're going to look and see Tobias Merriweather has, 2 catches for 5 yards so far in the season. And they're going to say, do we want to risk getting beat by Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Thomas, or do we want to, in the tight ends who've only really touched the ball outside of, haven't really touched the ball outside of one series, or do we want to try to shut down Audric Estime and Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love and Jabron Payne and that offensive line? Well, we know the answer to that, especially if it's wet. And right now it's at least 50% chance of rain predictions for noon tomorrow. So that is going to be a key. So if not only are you going to have a numbers disadvantage, you're going against a defense that is not going to make it easy for you to know who you're blocking. It's going to really require a sound plan, but a lot of discipline up front in the run game, because the run game will then set up opportunities to make big plays in the pass game. Because I do think Notre Dame's receivers can win battles against NC State. Even at the corner position, right? I mean, you talked about this. We're both very high on Aiden White. He's a very good cover player. He's not a great win at the catch point guy on down the field stuff. So, do they take some shots there? Shaheem Battle, long, downhill. He's a good cornerback, little tight hipped. There's some things that, matchup wise you can do against him, but especially with the safety position with your tight ends, your slots, and your outside guys, there's some things they can do. But if you're not able to run the football and you're constantly getting in those bad positions, it's going to hurt your ability to throw on first down because you're nervous about your running game being able to get the good 4 or 5 yards you need to get back on second down running the football. And then also if you're having issues defending the run the way that NC State plays, Ryan, you're also going to have issues protecting the quarterback. Those two things with NC State go hand in hand. And that's why another reason why the offensive line has to play well. As I mentioned before, in the 2 games at Carter Finley Stadium, Sam Hartman has averaged getting sacked 5 times a game. And that's just sacks. There's been other pressures and hits and stuff on him. They're going to have to give Sam Hartman time. If he has time, I have no doubt he can have success against NC State. The kid's from North Carolina. I joked with you before I started the show. I swear every time I come to North Carolina for a game, except 1 year at Wake Forest, which was actually Sam Hartman's first career start, I believe, or one of his first career starts all the way back in 2018. Every time I'm down here, I swear it rains. Every time. Well, guess what? Sam Hartman's from North Carolina.
Yeah.
He's been through this. He's played in plenty of rain games. So I'm not as concerned about that from a throwing standpoint, unless it's just a heavy downpour. But if it's pressure, if he's having to throw off his back foot, if he's not able to get comfortable in the pocket, which is something that's hurt him in the last couple of years against NC State, that's only going to lead to Notre Dame's inefficiency. It just adds to why controlling the line of scrimmage is so important. If Notre Dame controls the line of scrimmage, then some of these predictions are just like, no, guys, no, that's not happening. And if it does, this Notre Dame team is going to roll the schedule, right? But I do think this can be a convincing Notre Dame win if they control the line of scrimmage. To me, Ryan, if you said, okay, Brian, you guys got 10 minutes to do a show, all right? And so you can only talk about one key to the game. What's the one thing? I'd say, okay, let's talk about Notre Dame's ability to control the line of scrimmage. If Notre Dame can control the line of scrimmage in this matchup, everything else falls into place on both sides of the ball. I really believe that. That's how important this matchup is. And it's always important, but in this particular game, if you can win this matchup, you win the game. I mean, outside of just craziness, you throw 5 picks and all this other kind of craziness. Like, this is the key matchup. You do this, everything else falls into place, right?
Well, offensive line dominating for a defense is demoralizing. Like when a team just is able to get 4 or 5 plus yards per carry, like that is one of those situations where you're just kind of exhaling. When you sort of see defensive players with hands on hips, it's never a good thing, right? And that's what I think that really, like, it's an assertive mindset, I think, is the biggest thing that I want to see out of Notre Dame up front. And we also talk about, and we've talked about it a ton, NC State, is a very linebacker-centric team, right? And how are they able to be linebacker-centric? It's because they are able to control the line of scrimmage for the most part and let guys like Peyton Wilson and Drake Thomas and Isaiah Moore in past years flow and run to the football and be disruptive and blitz and kind of work into space a little bit. Peyton Wilson wants to work towards the line of scrimmage. He doesn't want to get hit 3 yards down the field, right? Like, that's not his bag. That's not what he wants to do. Not only are you establishing that line of scrimmage, but if I'm looking at it from a defensive perspective, if my guys are getting blown off the ball, because someone asked this, I believe, on the message board the other day, Brian, or they may have asked on the Monday show, they asked, like, with NC State being so disruptive with their linebackers, how do you prevent that? And my initial response was, movement at the line of scrimmage for the offensive line kills linebackers, because the defensive linemen are going to get pushed back. Traffic is going to ensue. Now guys like Peyton Wilson have to sort through garbage instead of sorting through clean space. The best way to make a linebacker's day absolutely difficult is to make things murky inside and to create movement at the line of scrimmage. That's how you stop this aggressive style 3-3 system, right? Mm-hmm. This team that wants to be stacked at times. They want to put a guy like, I know Peyton Wilson's technically the will in the system, but they want to put their linebackers behind a guy like CJ Clark. Let CJ Clark not get moved or create movement up front, and then the linebacker flows off of him. Basically, the linebackers are never wrong in those types of situations, but they want to make them wrong. The best way to make them wrong is to make their eyes cloudy. The minute the eyes are cloudy, you're in a lot of trouble as a linebacker. So I really think that the establishing the line of scrimmage will also take the best part outside of the corners on the NC State unit, in my opinion, the linebackers, it'll make their day a lot harder, which will make the offense for Notre Dame a lot more efficient on a down-to-down perspective.
Number 2, Ryan, this is a big one too. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this. This kind of explains itself. Uh, Protecting the football is always a general, assumption. It needs to be an important thing. This game especially, it's very important because, number one, you're on the road. It's always good to limit turnovers on the road. You don't want to do things allow the crowd to get into the game. The other part of it is I just don't think that NC State right now is at a place where their offense can go out there and just consistently move the ball up and down the field on Notre Dame. I mean, they may come out early and, give a little ground. That's kind of been the thing under Al Golden is, it's the way they play. Early teams can kind of move it a little bit the first couple drives, and then they, figure things out, and they do pretty well. So, you may see that a little bit early. But what you can't do is if you're playing well on defense, the thing that can be kryptonite to your defense playing well is giving them short fields, giving them extra possessions, shortening the game because you didn't protect the football. So in this game, especially protecting the football is going to be vitally important. You can't give them easy points. You can't lose points in this kind of game. That's the reality of it. Because like Notre Dame last year when they played at North Carolina, right? I mean, that was one of the more efficient games we've seen the Notre Dame offense play. I'd have to go get the stat book, but I think it was like top 5 to 10 all time in like first downs in a game, like top 5 Notre Dame ever in total first downs. I think it was actually second. It was just an incredibly efficient game against a pretty bad defense. I mean, you can't expect your offense to necessarily come out in this game and just move the ball against NC State like they did against North Carolina last year. This is a much better defense. And that's going to put you in some situations, where you've got to be really smart and efficient, all those kind of things. But on the flip side is this isn't the kind of offense you faced last year against North Carolina, right? So you don't need to be that outstanding that they were offensively, but you have to protect the football because let's say it takes them a couple series to kind of really get a read on what NC State is doing, then you need to play the field position battle till you figure it out. Right. Sure. Like, obviously, I want Notre Dame to come out and start fast and move the football. And that's an important thing, Ryan, when you're playing on the road and all that. Because if you can jump on NC State, this isn't a great football team on offense. It puts them behind the sticks where they have to throw the ball more. That's where Notre Dame can maybe really put this thing away and make it a blowout. But if you're not able to do that, you have to be smart, protect the football, and say, hey, look, it's just not there. Punt it away, let your defense go do its thing, and then you have time to figure it out. But you cannot give NC State cheat points or short fields in a game like this on the road. This is why we're actually talking about turnovers in this game, where normally we don't talk about turnovers because it's a given. Obviously you don't want to turn the ball over, but it's very important this week, especially in the first half.
Brian, a dangerous drinking game is to take a shot every time someone on this broadcast mentions Sam Hartman struggles against NC State, because you're going to hear it in nauseum. Like, I guarantee they're probably
going to talking about on Saturday during the
on
ABC
Saturday
broadcast?
during the broadcast. They're going to say it probably about 10 or 12 times during that game about, leading up to it and in the beginning portion of it. Oh, Sam Hartman's record against NC State isn't too great. His performances have really been up and down, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's going to be mentioned.
6 interceptions in 3 years.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that plays exactly to the narrative, right, of why this is important, because that is going to be talked about so much. And the reason that Sam Hartman has had so much struggles against NC State is because they have forced him into mistakes, right? They have limited the ability for Wake Forest to run the football in the past, which has put him into a lot of bad positions and forced those turnovers. That is what NC State is going to try to live off of defensively, right? They want you to feel pressured. They're going to keep coming at you, have the chaos ensue, and then that's when a mistake happens. That's when a fumble pops out. That's when an interception happens, strip sack, whatever it might be. That's what they live off of. They do, because they also understand, like, let's be honest with ourselves, right? Is right now Dave Doran and Robert and I are sitting down and having conversations of like, hey, we're going to be better offensively throughout this year, but right now we're not great yet, right? We still need our defense to play well. We still need to take advantage of opportunity. We need to be more of an opportunistic team, especially early on in the year before the offense really starts to get rolling. They understand how important possessions are in these types of football games and getting those opportunities to score. They need to score against Notre Dame. Not scoring or scoring field goals is not going to beat Notre Dame, in my opinion. And the reason that they make it easier for them to score is to get in better positions, right? Short fields, those extra opportunities. And it's going to be up to the Notre Dame offense to be clean. And the one great thing that we've seen about Sam Hartman, outside of one bad decision against Navy that was almost intercepted, he's been a very clean player so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
High completion percentage, not many turnover worthy throws. He's been very clean. If Sam Hartman has a clean football game and Notre Dame's able to establish the line of scrimmage, I think they win handedly. The one way that you make this game very close or have a given opportunity for NC State to win this game is if you shoot yourselves in the foot. Don't beat yourselves, beat NC State on Saturday. That's the biggest key.
It comes, you nailed it, Ryan. I mean, make NC State beat you, because if they do, I don't think they're good enough. I just don't think they're good enough to do that. Make them beat you, and that's a big part of it. Third key, Ryan. This is also kind of ties into if you control the line of scrimmage and give Sam Hartman, establish a run game early, give Sam Hartman time to throw the football. I think what we're going to see is some big plays, and I think that is a key to this game, is generating big plays in this game. If you're able to get them early, great. But they could also be things that kind of help you put this game away. And we even saw, like, the 2017 game, Ryan, with Notre Dame and NC State, to me was a perfect example of kind of where this game is. Now, that was a different type of NC State defense, right? That 2017 team, that was a 4-down defense, right? You had Bradley Chubb on one edge, and you obviously had the Hill kid inside. You had 4 kids that ended up getting drafted in your starting lineup.
Hill,
right. And obviously your middle linebacker is now starting in the NFL. That was a different type of team, but it was still a team that was built on shutting down the run. That was what their key was. And when you look at that game early, it took Notre Dame a little bit of time to kind of get going offensively. NC State was ahead 14-7 because of a blocked punt early in the game. And then Notre Dame kind of finally got going. They had a couple long drives in the second quarter that allowed them to score. But what put the game away in the second half, Ryan? It was a 70-plus yard touchdown run, right? It helped put the game away. And that Notre Dame team couldn't really throw the football all that effectively. But they had a big play from Durham Smythe that set up a touchdown in the first half. If you remember that backside seam throw that Brandon Wimbush hit to Durham Smythe. The point being is there's going to be opportunities against a team like this because of how aggressive they are. If you're disciplined and you are able to control the line of scrimmage, there are going to be opportunities for big plays that weren't necessarily there in 2017 because that defense was geared more towards controlling the line of scrimmage and limiting those plays, right? But the need for big plays is still there. I think a good offense can have more big plays against this NC State team and this Tony Gibson defense, because that is the vulnerability that it has, especially this year compared to last year. Like last year, Ryan, when I watched NC State, because of the other 2 linebackers you mentioned earlier, here's this crazy stat for you. Peyton Wilson last year, who's the only returning starting linebacker for NC State, had 12.5 tackles for loss last year. It's pretty good, right, Ryan? It's pretty good. But you know the answer to this question. Where did he rank on the defense in tackles? Where did he rank at linebacker in tackles for loss? Third.
Yeah.
Because the other 2 kids had 19 and 15, Drake Thomas and Isaiah Moore. And so when you look at it, it's like that defense was they didn't need to, at least I didn't think in the games I broke down, they didn't need to necessarily do as much to add numbers against the run the way most 3-3-5 defenses do. And that's, to me, what made them so good against the run, because those linebackers and the D-line that they had last year, which was a little bigger and could kind of maybe eat up a little bit more space, they didn't have to do the numbers thing. They could literally take their 6-man box and against most ACC teams and just beat them to the point of attack and shut down the run game. This team, I don't think, has that same ability, Ryan. You talked about a defensive end. They're more quick penetrators. If Notre Dame is able to get bodies on bodies and get movement, those quick penetrators get washed down, and you've got cutback lanes, right? And you don't have the same type of linebackers. And then, so what does that mean? That means NC State now has to do what I thought they did a lot against. So they didn't trigger numbers against UConn early, and UConn was getting some decent chunk runs. They were, pulling read zones, getting out the backside. They had a really nice inside zone cutback that went for like 8-9 yards early. And so then what did NC State do? They started bringing more numbers, getting tighter. And UConn did a lot of stuff formationally that's going to be similar to what Notre Dame did. A lot of 12 personnel, motions and shifts, things like that. and UConn was able to get a lot of different numbers into the box. Well, what that does is if Notre Dame is disciplined, sound, and wins at the line of scrimmage, is that creates more big play opportunities than maybe existed against this defense a year ago, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree or not with that, Ryan. We didn't talk about it before the show, but that's why, to me, big plays is going to be a huge could be a huge part of this game, because if you can rip off a couple big plays early, even if it's just a quick slant route where you beat a guy and it goes for 40, that's going to put NC State in a really big bind, because this defense was so good at limiting those type of plays last year in most games. I mean, even games they lost, Ryan, they lost a game giving up 24 points, lost a game giving up 16 points, they lost a game giving up 25 points. I mean, this team didn't lose games by getting beat 45-42 like in past seasons. So I think those big plays could be big time kryptonite for NC State. But it all circles back to Ryan, the very first point. That doesn't happen if you don't control the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everything plays off of it, right? I mean, it makes everything so much easier. We always talk about the RPO game. We always talk about the play action game. The ability to run and to establish a cohesive understanding up front of dominance, like that is like my biggest thing in this game is if you're able to stay in front of the sticks and be able to establish that tenacity up front and to really create a lot of movement, the play action game is going to work. If you want to move the pocket, that's going to work. The RPO game is going to work. You're going to have the ability to play a lot more man-to-man coverage outside because guys are going to try to get extra defenders in the box. Like that's going to happen, right? So at the end of the day, I think that that's how you kind of break open this team a little bit of NC State's caliber. I mean, they're a team that preys off of. We are going to be aggressive. We're not going to give up a ton. And offensively, we are hopefully not going to turn the ball over much. And I also think that if you're able to create a couple, some explosive plays early on in this football game, maybe you get them down a couple scores. That's not the place NC State's offense wants to be in right now. It's not like this is NC State's offense might be completely different in game 8 or 10 compared to what they are in game 2. But game 2, they're much more of a methodical, run the football, try to work the clock in your favor, and move the chains type of offense. They're not a team that's just going to rattle off 60-yard bomb. I mean, I literally just heard Brennan Armstrong on ACC Network this morning where he was talking about that, they just want to continue to be efficient and then the explosives will come, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's the biggest thing is that they understand that they're not that explosive, create big play offense right now. And if Notre Dame's offense is able to put pressure on you to be able to take advantage of opportunities and make the defense and the offense uncomfortable early on, that's not the game that NC State wants to play. So I think that would put a lot of pressure on this Wolfpack team in both areas, not even just defensively.
Ryan, you talked about what Brennan Armstrong said. He was repeating all of what Robert and I has said. That's what he said. That's what he said too. We got to really get better, being more efficient, and that's going to be a goal of theirs. And we'll get into that here when we get into the defense. So those are the three keys to victory for the Notre Dame offense. Obviously, there's start fast, all that, move the chains, early down success. Those things are all important every week. But controlling line of scrimmage, protecting the football, and generating big plays are our three keys to victory for the Notre Dame offense. Let's move over to the defense, Mr. Roberts, and it's going to follow a similar early path. Controlling the line of scrimmage is going to be key, but more specifically, I want to zero this in on something for point number one. I want to be more narrow with this one. They need to dominate the run game. Now, you may ask, oh, hold on a second. NC State's not a really good rushing football team, so why should your number one key be shutting down the run? It's the same exact point I made against USC last year. It's the same exact point I made against North Carolina last year. What were the two differences? Notre Dame last year played arguably 3 of the 4 best quarterbacks in college football. I think that's arguable. I would say it's arguable because I would say you need to have Hendon Hooker in that conversation. So let's just say this. 3 of the best 5 quarterbacks in college football last year, Notre Dame played them. 2 of them playing a very similar offense. That's somewhat similar to what Robert and I does when his offense is rolling, right? Spread the field efficiently, get the ball out, and all that kind of stuff. Why did Notre Dame have success against NC State or against North Carolina defensively, but they didn't have success against USC? I don't think there's a giant gap at quarterback. They're both mobile. They're both runners. Actually, Drake May was a more productive runner last year. They both had very good weapons on the perimeter. Neither had great offensive line. The difference is Notre Dame shut down North Carolina's ground attack. They did not shut down USC's ground attack. That was the big key, because when a team isn't a great rushing team, it's even more reason to dominate that part of the game,
Yep.
because now the quarterback doesn't have that. But you can't, it's hard to be an efficient offense when you're facing this secondary if you can't establish the ground game. So if Notre Dame's able to dominate the line of scrimmage, don't let NC State run the football, make them be like around 2.5 yards per carry, put everything on Brennan Armstrong's shoulders, that's going to be a key, because the dominating the run does what, Ryan? It's going to help put more pressure on Armstrong. As I said, it puts them behind the sticks. This is not an offense that has the playmakers to consistently make those plays in backed up situations. This is not a team that's going to generate a bunch of big plays unless Notre Dame makes mistakes, right? It's going to take Notre Dame making errors for NC State to make a bunch of big plays. So what you can't do is just let them kind of 4 yards, 5 yards, just running the ball and just kind of getting those chunk plays. And now, Brennan Armstrong's got the read zone game to his disposal on second and third down. They've got the quick game at their disposal on second and third down. They've got the quarterback movement plays second and third down, because they're in 2nd and 6, 3rd and 3, those type of things. You dominate the run down, put them in 2nd and 9, put them in 3rd and 8. That's where you can really get off the field early and often against this team. So it may seem antithetical because of what the strength is of this football team for NC State, because it's not running the football. It wasn't running the football last year. They averaged 113.8 yards per game last year running the football. They only averaged 126.2 the year before. And when you look at Syracuse last year with Robert and they didn't run the football very effectively either. So this is not going to be a strength of this football team, or should not, in week 2. So that just puts Notre Dame dominate this part of the game and make them one-handed.
Yeah.
That to me is the number one key for this game, right? And NC State won't be good enough to win this game if they're one-dimensional. I just don't think they will be.
I've talked about this several times, but any defensive coordinator wants to make an offense one-dimensional, because it makes a lot easier to make a team predictable, right? Like, the unpredictable nature of an offense is what makes people dangerous. Predictable makes people boring. It makes them understood. It makes it very easy to scheme against. And I really think that, for me, I think Brennan Armstrong is a good quarterback. I do. I think he's a good college quarterback. But I also think anytime you are going to put everything on the shoulders of one player, it's a dangerous game to play. It's not as dangerous when you have Drake May, when you have Caleb Williams, but we even saw last year with Drake May, they were able to do that, and Notre Dame came out and won that football game, right?
Convincingly.
Yeah. But Brennan Armstrong, all due respect to him, he's not Drake May. He's not Caleb Williams. He's not that caliber of player. So yes, I'm going to force him to beat me in this football game. I'm going to force him. I am not going to make things easy for him, because Brennan Armstrong, when he was good at Virginia a few years ago with Robert and I, a couple years ago now, it was built off of, let's have an RPO element to the game and have my running ability a part of the passing game. That was a part of it, right? And when you will become a predictable type of quarterback, those elements are kind of taken away a little bit. You want to force Brennan Armstrong to be a pocket passer, a guy that just wins strictly from the pocket. And the best way to do that is to force the run game to go away, because then it's like, why am I going to run play action or RPO action when you don't respect my run game? Like, why does that matter anymore? It doesn't matter. That's when you become a straight drop back, predictable passing offense, which is what you want to force a team like NC State to be, in my opinion. So yeah, shut it down. Their running backs just aren't great comparative to what they were a couple years ago. Like, when they had Ricky Person and when they had Zonovan Knight, like, that was a good running back tandem for NC State. That was talented. Right now, they don't have those types of guys. Like, the Houston kid's okay. They had one kid, I think it's a redshirt freshman, that was a decent recruit as far as being a 4-star, but they just don't have the dogs at running back right now. They don't have those types of guys right now. So force Brennan Armstrong to beat you. And from there, it's about being fit. It's about being disciplined and being able to stop it. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, throughout the rest of this podcast. But it starts, key number one is that you want to force everything onto Brennan Armstrong and trying to be the best version of himself, because there's going to be some times where maybe he is, but for the large portion of a game, I'm going to take Notre Dame in those odds to win that football game.
Yep.
More often than not.
Here's an interesting statistic, Ryan, because, we've talked a lot about Sam Hartman's record against NC State. Well, Sam Hartman faced off against Virginia back in 2021, in the year where Brennan Armstrong was really good. and Wake Forest dominated that game 37-17. And here's a big reason why. Brennan Armstrong threw for 407 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. 2 stats that were very important in that game. Number one is Brennan Armstrong averaged 6.9 yards per attempt because they had to throw it 59 times. Why did they have to throw it 59 times? Because they couldn't run the football. They ran for 99 yards, 27 carries for 99 yards. What did Wake Forest do in that game? They ran for 203 yards. So Sam Hartman had only threw for 270 yards. But he threw 3 touchdowns and no picks. But he went 9.3 yards per attempt because they had balance and they shut down the Virginia offensive line. In that year with Robert and I and Brennan Armstrong together, they lost 5 games. One of those was a 66-49 shootout in which they rushed for 216 yards. But here was their rushing totals and their other 5 losses. 24, 99, 82, 34, 71. Right? It's not a coincidence. And so when you look at it, it really does come down to it. And other than the rare Caleb Williams types, and even that doesn't always end well, as we saw last year when a week later when USC played Utah. And what was Utah's game plan against USC? Shut down the run game. Make Caleb Williams beat you by himself. Make him be Superman. He had to be Superman against Notre Dame, but here's the thing. I actually think we kept saying he had a Superman performance last year. I think that's the wrong character to be using, Ryan. He was Batman last year because he had Robin, the run game. You allowed that secondary feature to impact you. You can't. They didn't do that against North Carolina, and that's what allowed them to have such varied success defensively. And that's going to be a key in this game as well. It is really making them one-dimensional. And go ahead.
It's really funny that you say Superman because my buddy was literally texting me about the game yesterday, and I kind of had said the same thing of I think that I feel good about Notre Dame in this game. The only kryptonite, for lack of a better phrasing, is if Brennan Armstrong is somehow Superman. And I was like, I'll take those odds, right? That he won't be Superman type of thing. So I think it is all correlated, man. Like typically you want to force one area of a team or one player on a football team to beat you. Like that's typically what happens. That's how matchups are kind of dictated. And it might sound silly, but I do think that Brennan Armstrong is that guy that I want to have to beat me if you're Notre Dame this weekend.
And that's no disrespect to him. He's just not Caleb Williams, right? And look at last year against Ohio State. Early in the game, Ohio State run game wasn't doing a whole lot. And guess who led for 3/4 of that football game? Notre Dame. But once C.J. Stroud got help from the ground game in the 3rd quarter and 4th quarter, that's when Ohio State took over that football game. I'm going to give you another statistic and look at Syracuse last year. This is what Syracuse rushed for last year in their wins. 208, 156, 125, 388, 179, 158. And then they had a very close win over Virginia, 22-20, where they rushed for 75, and 125 and a really close win over Purdue, right? So their offense did not play well in those games. Here's what they rushed for in their losses. 124, 61, 25, 95, 120, and then 147 in a bowl game. Guys, the blueprint is there. Shut down the run game. They're not going to be good enough to beat you unless your offense does what, Ryan? Turns the ball over a bunch of times and gives them short fields, right? Number 2 key in this game is you said it earlier, Ryan, and I want us to dive into this point a little bit. I broke it down a little bit yesterday. This is not to say that Brennan Armstrong can't throw from the pocket, because if you just let Brennan Armstrong stay in the pocket and be comfortable and have time to throw, he's gonna make plays.
Sure.
But you want him in the pocket. Now, you want him in the pocket. You want him uncomfortable in the pocket. And like we talked about the offense, to me, if you're dominating the line of scrimmage to where you're getting after the run, that then is going to lead to your opportunities to be successful. I mean, when was the last time you saw a team dominate the run? And then whenever the guy passed, it's like nothing, right? I mean, it doesn't happen that often. Usually a great performance up front in the run game is going to usually give you opportunities to have some pressures in the pass game. So keep him in the pocket from a contain standpoint, but make sure he's uncomfortable in the pocket. I will tell you what my key is to that. The key to that key, right? It's not the discipline and the contain and all that, but the interior of the Notre Dame defensive line has to be turned loose in this game, in my opinion. If you're just using Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Jason Onye to just kind of stalemate, take up blocks to free up your linebackers, you're missing an opportunity. If they turn those guys loose, not only will they I think they can be successful, but I think that's going to make the pressures even more effective because now they're running through the line 2 yards deep as opposed to running through the line at the line, in my opinion. So if they can control the interior of the line of scrimmage, to me, that not only shuts down the run game, but that's the pressure that I think makes Brennan Armstrong the most uncomfortable. And I'm saying, and that's true for any quarterback. I'll tell you right now, Ryan, when I played quarterback at the level I played at, if all my pressure was coming off the edge, if we were doing okay up the middle, I'm okay. I can climb the pocket. You can ride that guy outside. I can step up and run or step up and throw. The most trouble, the most uncomfortable that I ever felt as a quarterback, and most quarterbacks the way, is when the pressure's coming right in my face because I can't step into it. And that's when I start throwing off my back foot. That's when I start spinning into trouble, those type of things. I spin out thinking I'm going to make somebody play, and then somebody comes around on the stunt, and they're right there on me. You think of the pressure that the sack they had against Drake May last year. That was a big early stop that allowed Notre Dame to get off the field. It was Riley Mills coming outside. They made him spin around, and Riley then chases. You have to keep him in the pocket, but you have to make him uncomfortable. If you can do that, then it really, honestly, Ryan, the third point we're going to talk about, it's important because it's a more a smaller point. This is it right here, and they kind of go together. Dominate the run game. Don't let Brennan Armstrong get comfortable. I mean, it's not simple to execute, but it's simple to say, do that, and you control this football game.
I agree. Well, I think that for me, it's also keep him in the pocket because I think that he's a tough kid, right? Like he'll stay in there and he'll work through his progressions and he'll stay in the pocket as a passer a lot of times. He will. But the things that have kind of prevented Brendan Armstrong in the past from being maybe a consistently great quarterback is one, I think that he's forcing some bad decisions at times. And also he gets banged up a little bit, right? Like those two biggest things have been kind of the kryptonite to him, for using the same terminology again. I really think that he's a guy that wants to play loose. He wants to have options as a quarterback. He wants to run play action. He wants to run RPO. He wants to extend the pocket, move the pocket laterally. Like he wants to work in and outside of the structure of an offense. And I think that the structure of playing inside the pocket is something that he could do, but not consistently, right? Like it's not a spot that he just wants to be in. Because at the end of the day, he's not the biggest kid in the world, right? I mean, he's listed at 6'2". He's probably 6'1" and some change and probably 210 pounds. Like he's not the biggest quarterback of all time. That pressure is going to get to a kid like that eventually, right? As far as getting inside his head a little bit, especially a player that has missed time. I mean, he literally missed the Notre Dame game 2 years ago, right? Because of bruised rib. Wasn't that the whole thing of him, right? It was because he was beat up a little bit. So make that kid uncomfortable because that's just not his game, technically. His best game functioning is being able to work both in and outside of the pocket, the dual threat aspect. If you take the dual threat out and just make him beat you from the pocket, that's when hopefully, to your point, the Jason Onyes, the Riley Mills, the Howard Crosses, then also edge pressures from Jordan Botelho and Joshua Burnham and Javante Jean-Baptiste. That's when they can get home and they can force some bad decisions and continue to get them on the ground. Like that's what you want to make this kid uncomfortable.
2 years ago, Ryan, when you talk about that Virginia team that we brought up earlier that was so good offensively, I talk about it, that was 34.6 points per game. Brennan Armstrong threw for over 4,400 yards that season. But to your point, they were 6-2 at one point in time. They finished 6-6. Their offense scored 49 against BYU. The rest of the way, they scored 3, 38, 24. They just weren't as effective. Brendan Armstrong wasn't quite as impactful. The numbers were good, but you could just tell he wasn't in the same kind of rhythm. They just couldn't move the football the same, put in the end zone. And a big part of it was because, to your point, he'd gotten beaten around a little bit. And sometimes numbers are good, but numbers don't lead to the same kind of points they did early in the season because they just, like I said, they knocked him around. He misses the Notre Dame game. That was a big point. They never quite recovered from that in a lot of ways and lost all those games down the stretch. So yes, knocking him around is going to be a big part of this. And the third part too, Ryan, it leads to, we talked about turnovers on offense. Early down success is going to be kryptonite to NC State this game. For an early down success for Notre Dame, I just don't see NC State being a team that's going to consistently move the chains on third and longs.
Yeah.
So if you can dominate, it ties in, early down success leads to dominating the run game. It leads to putting pressure on Brendan Armstrong, all of that. It all ties together. But early down success is going to be a key for Notre Dame in this game.
Third and threes, third and fours, third and fives. Like that's not where you want to be against Brendan Armstrong because that's where he breaks the pocket and he runs for 6 yards for a first down. You're just like that. I talked about this earlier, Brian, but like as a defensive player, it's debilitating to be able to just be run on. It is even less encouraging when a quarterback continues to pick up third and shorts with his legs. Like that is just so frustrating. So yes, I can't imagine if Notre Dame is playing NC State into a lot of 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 10s, and plus, you're in a good spot. Because that's just like a general thing, right? Like that's very general. Most teams playing in 3rd and 7 or longer consistently aren't going to be very productive, right? From a consistency basis, because that's a tough thing to get your kind of dig your heels out of. It's very difficult, but especially for an NC State team that wide receiver wise, just it's not the wide receiver pass catch for NC State are just not incredibly impressive, right? They're just not that type of team. So if I'm forcing them into being a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, you start making it less likely for a guy like Brendan Armstrong to break the pocket, pick up first down. You have to start talking about, can the outside receivers start to make plays? And any of the outside receivers for NC State, again, all due respect, I'll take that. I'll take Cam Hart or Benjamin Morrison versus them every day of the week. Throw Jaden Mickey in there. Throw Christian Gray in there at times. I'll take those matchups if I'm Notre Dame.
I agree with that, Ryan. That's going to do it for our keys to victory. We're going to do our prediction show next, but we're going to kind of give you all what we think the score is going to be. Ryan and I are very close this week. Tell you how we think the game is going to play out, hand out some game ball predictions, and then we'll do a little mailbag at the end as well. But before we dive into that, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast if you've not done so. And a lot of you have, because our numbers have really taken off. Remember when we were like, hey, we're almost at 3,000. It's like, okay, not worried about that anymore. It's like, oh, hey, you know what? We're kind of doing well. We got over 15,000 subscribers on this channel now. We hit that landmark. So we know. But for those of you who have not signed up, you're definitely missing out. Don't want to miss out too much on that. So sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. When you look at this game, Ryan, and you talk about making predictions, I think this is a game that is I don't know about you, I've been kind of all over the place with this game this week because we're still in that point in the season where we really don't know what Notre Dame is if we're being honest and objective about where this is. I see people talking about like they're going to beat NC State as bad as they beat Tennessee State and Navy, and I hope that's true. That'd be phenomenal because that would tell us this Notre Dame team is really outstanding. Really outstanding. But I'm confident heading into this game. But the challenge has been, but what kind of margin are we looking at? That's kind of been my challenge. And so we're going to make our predictions for this game. And we'll start with you, Ryan, and give me your prediction and why you came to the prediction, how you see this game playing out.
Yeah. I ended up 34-17. Notre Dame defeats NC State. The reason I kind of got there was ultimately on both sides of the ball, just kind of breaking it down. I think what Notre Dame does well can really have effect on NC State. And I just think vice versa, the strengths at NC State aren't going to threaten Notre Dame as much consistently, which I think is a big thing, right? The thing that I look at like on Notre Dame's offensive side of the football, I think Notre Dame is going to be able to run the football on NC State a decent bit because I think that you look at NC State, they are a little bit of an undersized front. CJ Clark is a big guy, but then the two ends in this defense are 280, 290 pounds. Not the biggest defensive line that you're going to see. And I really do think that despite the replacements for Isaiah Moore and Drake Thomas being good football players, they're still not Isaiah Moore and Drake Thomas,
yes.
Right? So the linebackers are still not quite as good as they were last year, obviously. And Peyton Wilson is a really good athlete. I like his film, but he's a kid that wants to play in pursuit a ton, right? Like he's not a front side guy that's going to be playing Mike at the next level. Like that's not his game necessarily.
Is he a Viper if he's at Notre Dame, Ryan, in your opinion?
He's probably still a Will. I mean, he's just Maris Loifau, I think, just a little bit twitchier, in my opinion, a little bit longer. So, I mean, he's a really good player, but I think that he wants to work space a lot more than working downhill. because that's what I think the most underrated player on the NC State defense last year. Because Drake Thomas got a lot of the conversation. Obviously, the corners were very good football players. Peyton Wilson was a little bit of a playmaker. Isaiah Moore was just a rock in the middle of that defense, man. Just a really sound middle linebacker. Like, he was downhill, thumper, physical, comes to balance. Like, he was a really impactful football player. I think Notre Dame's going to be able to run the football a little bit on them, because I think that where you look at the losses from last year, you lost Corey Durden, you lost the 2 linebackers, and you lost Tanner Engel, their best safety.
What did you say? What did you say? Durden was like 320 around there, right?
Big.
I mean,
he was like 315.
Notre Dame faced him in 2021 as well for Florida State when he was at Florida State. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've lost a lot of the middle of the defense from last year for NC State. You lost Durden. You've lost both of those linebackers I already talked about, Moore and Thomas. You also lost Tanner Engel, who was their most impactful safety this past year, right? A little bit of a smaller guy, but he was a really good run defender. I think Notre Dame's going to have a chance to really establish the line of scrimmage in this one and run the football. I think that's going to be the biggest advantage. My biggest question mark about Notre Dame in this one is, are you going to be able to make enough plays outside to keep this balanced, right? So that you can work all areas of the field, not just become a condensed team. Because if you come to condense, that plays in NC State's favor a little bit. But ultimately, I think Notre Dame's going to be able to run the ball well. I think that's going to do a lot for Sam Hartman in this passing game. I'm a big fan of throwing the ball in first down and getting, the ball working early down. But I actually think that this is a game where if I'm Notre Dame, I'm coming out and I'm establishing that run early, man, and saying, like, this is our day, folks. Like, this is us. So offensively, I think they're going to be able to run the ball well. Defensively, I just really can't see NC State getting a running game going against Notre Dame. Like, I just can't see it, right?
It'd be problematic.
And at the end of the day, this secondary with Cam Hart, Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, Christian Gray, Xavier Watts, those types of guys, I will take that bet as far as them making more plays than what the NC State wide receivers and the passing game does. So 34-17. I think Notre Dame comes out and they actually establish momentum early on. And I think this is the one where we're looking at like 27-14 in like the fourth quarter at some point. Notre Dame, though, has been kind of like front running the entire time, and then they score a touchdown late to really seal the victory from NC State.
Let's do some game ball predictions, Ryan. Let's begin with offense. When you fast forward, if the game plays out the way that you are predicting it's going to play out, who are you going to be on the post-game show? Because it's going to be you and Vince at the beginning of the post-game show. Who are you going to be who do you predict you're going to be handing your game ball to on the offensive side of the ball? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, offensively, it's boring because he was kind of the guy last week, but I think it's Audric Estime again. Like, I really do. I think that he's going to be the guy that is going to be able to wear down this defensive line. It's again, CJ Clark's a good football player. The two ends have impactful potential. Peyton Wilson's a good football player. But the other 2 linebackers that are taking over are a little bit of undersized kids, guys that I think you can run the football up the middle. So I really think that Audric Estime is going to come out and run for 130 yards in this one, maybe a down or 2. He's just going to establish identity early on, and then everything off of that, the Jeremiah Loves, the Jabron Paynes, the passing attack for Notre Dame, that's all going to play off of the fact that Audric Estime is being that hoss as a running back for you in this game.
Let's go to the other side of the ball, Ryan, and let's talk about your game balls on defense. So if Notre Dame wins this game and does what you think and hope that they're going to do, who are you handing your game balls out to?
I think that it was just a really tough one, honestly. I had 2 guys in mind because I really am hoping for a safety breakout at some point, Brian. Like, I really hope that at one point in the game soon, and hopefully it's this one, that Xavier Watts is able to have an interception, a couple pass breakups, and force a couple bad Brennan Armstrong decisions. I ultimately, though, ended up with, I think, a guy that's been quietly really good the first 2 games that I think is going to be really impactful in the middle for Notre Dame and get some interior pressure is Howard Cross, man, has been good. Like, surprisingly, he's a 3-way tie for the most tackles on the team right now, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he was really good against Tennessee State. So Howard Cross, an unsung hero on this defense. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a couple tackles for loss, maybe a sack, and he's a big part of why they were able to shut down this NC State running game.
That'd be big. If him or Riley Mills or Jason Onye are our player of the game, that means Notre Dame dominated the line of scrimmage. Absolutely. And it's going to be tackles for loss. It's going to be it's a lot like, we talked about that great interception by Ramon Henderson last week, and the focus was on the play Ramon Henderson made because it was a phenomenal play. But we forget the reason the ball sailed and hung up in the air is because Howard Cross was right in that guy's face and forced him to throw off of his back foot. Right? So
Yes.
that doesn't show up, to your point, Rand, that doesn't show up in the stat sheet. But
Yeah.
that was a big part of that interception, right? And a big
Yeah.
part of that turnover.
There's been a lot of those plays for the defense. I even think back to the first game when Jordan Botelho had that pressure that kind of forced a little bit of that errant pass where DJ Brown actually got beat down the field. It's like the defensive line has, I think, been a little bit more disruptive than people think in the
Then the
passing
numbers
game.
show,
It just
yeah.
maybe hasn't always resulted in sacks, but it's resulted
Right.
in some bad throws and some timely
Right.
stuff.
Right. Ryan, I'm going 30-17. I've been a little bit reserved in two of the games this year. Navy, obviously I went 38-13. Thought Notre Dame would pull away late. I'm going to continue that because I'm still just trying to feel out this team a little bit. I think Notre Dame's the better team. And what you all have to understand, what I think based on what I think of this NC State team, 30-17 is a very good road victory for Notre Dame. A 10-point or a double-digit win over this NC State team is going to be very good. I was at one point in time, I was at 24-10, 24-14. I've done 24-17. I'm going 30-17, Ryan, partly because of what you said, although I think it might take a little bit longer to get going. I think second half, at the very least, at the latest, I think the run game gets going. If they are able to run the football early, this game won't be close. And your prediction could be accurate or even more. Because I think if they're able to establish the run game, what that's going to do, Ryan, is that's going to force NC State to start triggering their safeties more and more and more. And I think that's going to result in Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey, Jaden Greathouse, Rico. Somebody along those lines is going to step up, and somebody else is going to step up too. And I'm going to talk about that when I get to my game balls. But I think it's going to be a somewhat. I don't think it's going to be a super competitive game in that we're going to feel like, oh, geez, Notre Dame is going to lose. So I agree with you there. But I think it's going to just be a little bit sloppier, mainly because of the weather and because I do think this is a good NC State defense. Is it as good as last year? I don't think so, at least not in game 2. But it's still a very good defense. It's one of the best coach defenses they're going to play. And combined with the weather, I think it's going to take Notre Dame maybe a little bit of time to get going. But I think they eventually get going in the second half and pull away. If Notre Dame comes out and starts fast, this will be a rout. And the reason I say, and I'm not, I can't predict that right now because we haven't seen Notre Dame on against this type of opponent. The reason I say that, Ryan, is because I don't think this NC State team is built to come back because, yes, Brennan Armstrong is good. He is that kind of quarterback. Robert Anae is that kind of quarterback. That 2021 Virginia team was definitely capable of coming back from big deficits because they could score fast. But why? You and I have talked about it plenty of times this week because he had a supporting cast in the pass game that year that could do damage. And it wasn't just Wicks. It wasn't just the tight ends. I mean, I think it was like their number 5 receiver averaged like 18 yards a catch.
Rashawn Henry.
Yes. Yeah. He was at like 18 yards a catch. He could make
all he did was catch touchdowns that year.
That's
it was fascinating.
It was crazy. Yeah. They don't have those kind of weapons at NC State right now. So I think if Notre Dame jumps out early, it'll turn into a rout. I just, from a prediction standpoint, I just can't go there yet. I need to see a little bit more from Notre Dame, but I do think they'll stay in front, and I think they'll pull away second half and make it a 30-17 game in similar fashion to you, Ryan.
You know what's wild about that Virginia team, though, was that like the 4th or 5th passing option a lot of times was Billy Kemp. This NC State would kill for a Billy Kemp right now. Like, give me a Billy Kemp. Yes.
Yeah, just give me one of your tight ends that you guys had in 2021, please. I don't even need both of them. Just give me one of them, Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, when I think about how I see this game playing out, Audric Estime could be a guy. I think we're still going to see the carry split a little bit. I think we'll see one of the other running backs rip off a long run at some point in time in this game. But you know who I think is really going to be a big key to this game and who I'm going to hand my game balls out to? It's going to be to one of, if not game balls, but one of the tight ends is going to break out in this game. And it's not just going to be in the pass game. They blocked very well in the opener. They were a little bit more inconsistent blocking last week, I thought. There was a couple dominant blocks. Mitchell Evans had a pancake that was on in the Joe Moore Award vote for Pancake of the Week. But there was also a lot of misses at tight end last week. I think what Tennessee State threw at them last week is going to help this offense because they did have to see so much of that craziness that they threw at them. And I think this team will be better prepared for that. But I think the tight ends are going to be very key to the run game this week, Ryan, in protecting the edge. And they're going to be taking on a lot of those linebacker crashes off the edge. But I also think we're going to see a little bit of a breakout in the pass game from the tight ends this week as well, Ryan. I have a feeling we're going to see some sort of play action pass that's going to some kind of throwback, some kind of seam, something where we're going to see a couple really big plays from the tight ends this week. And that's going to be the thing that sparks the offense. And once that happens, I think that's when the offense takes off at this point in time. And so that's where I'm going.
Last week was so hilarious because it was like, I guess we don't throw the tight ends anymore. And then it was like on one drive, it's like, here's 4 catches for you, Mitchell Evans, and here's a touchdown, like for Holden Stace. It was just absolutely hysterical. And I hope that you are correct. I hope that the tight ends continue to get used more because that is going to be a valuable part of this team when all is said and done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Defensively, Ryan, my game ball for this game, I've been all over the place. I was going to go with an interior guy. You took that. So I was like, I was thinking of going with an interior guy, but you took that one. I had 3 guys written down as options. I had Riley Mills, and I had J.D. Bertrand, and I had Cam Hart. And those are my 3 guys. I just have a feeling NC State's going to do what Navy did and what Tennessee State probably should have done, which is avoid Benjamin Morrison. I think they're going to try to go at the Notre Dame linebackers in the pass game. I think they're going to try to go at Cam Hart in the pass game with some shots. And so I was kind of back and forth between J.D. Bertrand and Cam Hart. I'm still kind of torn on it. I'm going to lean towards J.D. Bertrand right now just because I think he's going to be a big role in shutting down the run defense. Yeah. But I said it a couple weeks ago, and I see it again this week. I just have a feeling that Cam Hart's going to make a couple really big plays in this game. I feel like that, like you feel about Xavier Watts. Like I just have a feeling that there's going to be a ball that's thrown out into the flat that is going to not have a lot of juice on it because of the pressure, and Cam Hart's going to step in front of it and make a game-changing play or 2. So that's kind of where I went. But I'm going to go J.D. Bertrand because he's going to need to not only play well in the run game, Ryan, but they're going to do some things in the scramble game that he's going to have an impact on, containing Brennan Armstrong in the scramble game. And I think he's also going to have an impact to me in pass defense. He's going to have to do a good job of protecting against the middle. Some of the success NC State had last year in North Carolina had last year in the first half when they did hit passes, it was over the middle. If you remember, they hit a couple 3rd downs and 2nd downs over the middle to Josh Downs, some of the other receivers, and JD wasn't in the game. And then the second half, when JD came back, I think he got kicked out for targeting again, didn't he? In the second half of that game, so that part of the field was kind of there. I think he's going to help take that away a little bit this week. So I'm going to go with JD Bertrand, but man, I was really torn between him, Riley Mills, and Cam Hart. I really was. But if one of the safeties is that guy, that's gonna be big because that's the one position that's probably still my biggest question mark right now for the Notre Dame defense. This special teams, Ryan. We didn't talk about this in the keys. Let's give out a special teams game ball because I have a feeling that it's if we don't talk about special teams in this game, we're gonna bring on some bad karma from the football gods, and I don't believe in any of that stuff. Obviously, you guys know that, but I'm just having a little fun here because the last time Notre Dame played at NC State, they lost because of special teams. What was the one touchdown in that Hurricane game? It's a block punt. So let's talk about special teams, Ryan. If Notre Dame wins this game at the end of the game and we're handing out game balls for special teams, who's going to be the standout?
So I actually was originally going to go with Spencer Schrader because obviously my 34-17, that would suggest that there were 2 field goals made in that game. And I think that could happen. But I'm actually going to go with Bryce McPherson just because I believe that the punting game will be big on both sides of the football in this one because this is going to be a game where it's not like Notre Dame played against Navy, right? And they didn't punt the football at all because the offense was just churning. Notre Dame is going to have to punt the football at points in this game, right? Like I believe that. But I really think that Notre Dame has a chance to put NC State into some very long field situations. Yep. So I think Bryce McPherson is able to pin them deep a couple of times. That is really going to kind of solidify that momentum of Notre Dame, not letting NC State become an explosive offensive team, have to try to put together long drives, cohesive drives. And I just think that is going to be a big thing of them is forcing them to win off of bigger fields, not short fields.
So my final score prediction was 30-17, Ryan, which the way I have it, I do not have them missing an extra point. I have them hitting 3 field goals, especially when you consider the conditions, Ryan. If he goes 3 for 3 on field goals and then 3 for 3 on extra points, I think that's going to deserve him the game ball. I hope that it's for someone that blocks a kick or Chris Tyree returns one. Or look, we're going to see Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love back there returning kicks this week. So it could be one of them too. But NC State, I think, is a pretty well coached special teams unit. So I'm going to take the easy one and go with Spencer Schrader in this particular game.
I hope somebody has him in college football fantasy, man, because you're predicting to have 12 fantasy points this week at least. So yeah.
Can I say something else, Ryan? That I think we all can agree on one thing about our game balls. I think we all agree, me and you and the entire Notre Dame fan base, that your prediction for special teams player of the week this week is completely wrong, because we don't ever see Bryce McPherson because the offense rolls and he's never on the field. I think we can all agree on that, right?
So there's going to be times where they're going to have to punt, Notre Dame Nation.
I don't want to.
I know.
They got their season-long punt out of the way last week against Tennessee State.
Sure.
All right, Ryan, that's going to do it for the game predictions. We're going to do a little mailbag next here coming up. But before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that if you're listening via podcast platform. And of course, as always, sign up for the message board at boards.rsbreakdown.com. Sign up for or go to the IB store. I'm going to have some new merch we're going to be putting on here very soon, but we still have a lot of hats, shirts. I got behind me here in the southern compound here where we do the show. I got a little IB blanket hanging over there. I know, Ryan, you have a couple of those at your house. They're very comfortable. IB flags, all that good stuff, folks. So check those out in the Irish Breakdown store. Let's finish up today, Ryan, with a mailbag. And right now we have several super chats, and we'll answer those. And we'll just get to a few questions. We're not going to do a lot of questions here, but we're going to just do a little mini mailbag since our prediction show tends to go a little bit shorter than most of our other stuff. And let's start off right here, Ryan.
We had from AST12321 with the super chat. Thank you so much. Could NC State give Notre Dame more chances to throw downfield by not being as afraid of the deep ball as Tennessee State and Navy were, and constantly having defensive backs bailing?
I could see that, Ryan, especially if what you said is true of the run game kind of comes out and it's early on. Because here's the thing, for the reason 3-3-5, I've seen a lot of people say, well, this is a 3-3-5 team. Notre Dame should be able to run football on them. And I'm like, well, that's true in theory, which is why I hate the 3-3-5. But this is a really good run defending 3-3-5. As I've pointed out before, they've been a top 25 run defense each of the last 2 years. They barely allowed over 100 yards rushing last season. And so when I look at it, Ryan, they're a team that doesn't, and they don't do it by just triggering 8 guys all the time. They don't. They do it by triggering their linebackers all the time. If Notre Dame is able to have success early against their base defensive looks and calls, then that's going to force them, because the point you made, which is spot on, Ryan, is the kids replacing Drake Thomas and what's the other linebacker's name? Isaiah Moore.
Yeah,
those kids they're good football players. They're young, but they're not those guys, right? And so they're going to need more help on that second level, which I do believe. And there's a lot more faith in their cornerbacks because than we've seen in the past. So, and that's partly, Ryan, why I had my game ball predictions are for one of the tight ends, if not the tight end duo, to be the breakout. Because especially when Notre Dame goes 12 personnel, they're going to have a lot of dudes near the line of scrimmage. And so there's going to be some opportunities for Notre Dame to take some shots outside. This would be a great game to see Tobias Merriweather get going. If Chris Tyree is going to have some opportunities to make some plays against their linebackers and some different route combinations, some post-snap switch stuff that you could see from Notre Dame that could put NC State in some really tough binds with their linebackers and safeties and coverage. So I could definitely see that. NC State is not going to fear Notre Dame's pass game going into this game. They're going to have to make them respect it. But they're not going to, because they're going to look at Notre Dame and say, guys, we can't shut it all down. What's the biggest thing? What's the thing we're most afraid of right now? It's the run game. And we're going to have to shut that down and make them beat us, because they're going to have to beat us doing something they haven't shown that they can do so far. That's a smart way to go about defending Notre Dame right now. Make them beat me with Tobias Merriweather has 2 catches for 5 yards. Go for it. Make them beat me with their tight ends who haven't been super pro. Make them beat me with Chris Tyree and Jaden Greathouse and Deion Colsey. They're not going to beat me with Audric Estime in that offensive line. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see some opportunities, and they're going to have to make plays. That's going to be a big part of it.
I really hope so. I mean, to the question, I think that it can happen. I really hope it does happen because if you ask me what's the weakest part of this NC State defense, I would say it's the safety position. I don't
Yeah.
think they're bad football players, but I don't think they're Tanner Ingle, what they had last year, right? Like they just don't have that type of dude back there. So I think that there's some seam stuff that I think could happen. There's some over stuff that I think could happen that could really force safeties into some bad spots. And honestly, even though Aiden White and Shaheem Battle are an excellent cornerback duo, if there's some pre-snap stuff where Sam Hartman realizes that like he's got man-to-man outside and maybe they're in a little bit of a press situation, I would love a guy like Tobias Merriweather or Deion Colsey or even Jaden Thomas in certain scenarios to just get an outside release and try to win a one-on-one matchup.
Yep.
Because yes, Aiden White is good. Yes, Shaheem Battle is good. But if Notre Dame is going to be the team that we think they could be this year, you have to be able to beat
Yes.
those types of corners one-on-one, right? When you're going against Clemson, you got to beat Nate Wiggins one-on-one. When you're playing against some of the best teams in college football, if you play the Georgias of the world, if you play the Alabamas of the world, they're going to have good corners, right? And you're going to have to be able to beat that. So yeah, if you figure out that it is man-to-man outside on a play, a little bit of some press technique where if I get a good release, I can get a little bit of separation on the outside and Sam Hartman just gives him a chance. That back shoulder work or just working down the sideline, I would love to see him take a shot. I would love to see it because I think Notre Dame can win those battles. They just
Yes.
haven't shown to consistently do it yet at this point.
Ryan, if they're unable or unwilling to go at NC State's corners, that's going to be a very bad sign for Notre Dame's ability to consistently beat the best teams on the schedule.
Agree.
And you and I have been talking about Aiden White for a few weeks now, and we've talked about Shaheem Battle, and we like and respect these corners. This isn't a knock on their corners. They're very good. They're one of the 3 or 4 best corner tandems they're going to face in the regular season all year. But they're not, to me, Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart. They're not Joey Porter Jr. and Kalen King. They're not.
I don't even think they're Joey. I don't even think they're Kalen King and Johnny Dixon this year. Like I don't even think they're that, right? I mean, yeah.
So they're good, but they're if you're it'd be one thing if you're just coming out running it down their throat and you just don't need it again. But at some point in time, you're going to have to get that part of your game going.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I'd like to see them take some of those shots this week. And NC State is going to dare them to do that. And we're going to see if they can have some success. Because at the end of the day, as you said, Ryan, it's going to come down to can those receivers make the plays? That's something they got to show.
Brian Chesenik, thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate it, Brian. Brian, glad to hear you are coming to the city of Oaks. Let me know if you need food recommendations near NC State. Go Irish.
Yeah, man, hit me up. I'm always looking for some good barbecue places. And as long as they're not the traditional North Carolina barbecue, right? Because I'm not a big fan of that vinegar. Yeah, the
vinegar based.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
but hey, man, either. Any good recommendations? My dad and I'll be getting in town Friday. We'll be leaving Sunday. So yeah, any good food recommendations, man? Let me know. I'd appreciate it.
We had another super chat from Brandon Plensner. Thank you so much, Brandon. Who was the offensive coordinator for Virginia when Notre Dame held them and Armstrong to just 3 points in 2021? How does this NC State offense compare to the Virginia one in 2021?
Yeah, they didn't hold Armstrong to 3 points. Armstrong was out that game. He didn't play.
It was like Wolf Fork or something, right?
Yeah. Like and now look, here's the deal. I still think Notre Dame played very well against their receivers that game. And what's interesting is they actually had, I believe they had 2 guys go for 100 yards against them in 2019. Remember that game in 2019? I thought they did a much better job against the receivers in 2021. And I know that they didn't have Brendan Armstrong, but I actually thought the secondary played very well in that game. If you remember, Ryan, that was the first game of Ramon Henderson at safety. And he played
that ranging interception.
He had that crazy interception. But look, they held Dontavian Wicks to 2 catches for 32 yards. K'Tuan Thompson went over 100, but I think a lot of that came in the second half. Jelani Woods had 2 catches for 13 yards. Rashawn Henry had 1 catch for 4 yards. Billy Kemp had 4 for 37. I mean, yes, they didn't have Brendan Armstrong a quarterback, but they kept those guys in check as well, in my opinion, when you go back and look at that game, Ryan. So, this is a very different team skill-wise. This is now in Brandon asked this question before we really got deep into the breakdown, right?
Sure.
And so we did kind of compare it a little bit. I would say this. I think the offensive line's a little better than that Virginia offensive line. Not by a ton, but it's better. I didn't love that Virginia offensive line in 2021. That was
Yeah.
one of the things that held them back a little bit. And when they didn't have Armstrong to kind of run around and do some escaping type of stuff, they definitely weren't as effective then. But the skill isn't as good this year. It's just not. Like Porter Brooks was a highly ranked kid. He's a quality athlete. They got a couple the Concepcion kids, a solid football player. But they just don't have the weapons, Ryan, that Virginia
they have
had
the
in
Rice transfer too, right?
Yeah.
The tall kid, I forget his name,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But like, to me, Ryan, when I look at Virginia, the two times they played Virginia, both times they played Virginia when Robert and I was there, they had very good receivers, and it was a different guy different groups both times. I mean, completely remade receiving corps both times. In 2019, it was Hassan Dubois. It was Joe Reed. It was Terrell Jana. It was Tanner Crawley. The only guy that was really similar was Billy Kemp. That year had 35 catches for 289 yards. Dontavian Wicks that year only had 3 catches on the season. Right.
Billy Kemp is still somehow in college football. Somehow, I don't know how that
No,
is.
he's not.
Still around.
Is he seriously?
I think he's on a different team now. I'm pretty sure he's on somebody. But
I'm going to look that up. That's crazy.
Dubois was really good that year, though, man. Hassan Dubois was fantastic that year.
Yeah. Dude, he's at Nebraska. Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm telling you, man.
How is that even possible?
This offseason. I don't know.
Is he in his 7th year?
Has to be.
Like, Ryan, that guy played 8 games back in 2018.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, what the heck?
I don't know how it's a thing, but it is 100%.
Yeah, I mean, he played at least 7 games in all 5 years at Virginia.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see how that's even a thing. Like, that's weird.
Yeah.
I wonder if they did it because of the shooting last year. If maybe they gave some kids, you know what I mean? Like, if maybe they gave some of those Virginia kids, like, hey, since you missed out on your last game and your bowl game, I wonder if maybe that might be it. I wonder if that might be it.
That's Virginia's honoring them this weekend. It's like the first home game since that happened. So
last week was their first game. Yeah, because they canceled their season at the end of the year last year, which normally I'm like, when there's like a tragedy on campus, or if there's like an injury, it's like, hey, you honor those people, but that was a whole different animal, man. That was a whole different animal. So I completely understood them. Like, there's way more important things. There was way more important things to deal with than football last year. At that point,
they asked Brendan Armstrong about that on ACC Network as well. It's very sad, man.
Yeah,
sad.
Absolutely. Very different team. I will say this, though, on the flip side, Ryan, the other thing that's very different, this is a much better defense than the one he had in 2019 or 2021 at Virginia.
Agree.
That's the other part. I mean, that Virginia team they were not good on defense that year, Ryan. And I think I'm being kind of nice if we're being honest.
I'm trying to remember who was on that defense. Was that like Joey Blunt and Zane Zandier, like that defense?
Yeah, Noah Taylor was on that defense. Yeah.
Noah Taylor was quietly on North Carolina last year. No one noticed.
Yeah, I know, right? Seriously. Who was that really good end they had? Or was that 2019? That was 2019. That's what I'm thinking of. 2019 they had a kid. But yeah, they had where's he at? Mandy Alonso was a guy that was coming off of a pretty good year. I liked him coming into the year. Yeah. So yeah, he's gonna have a much better defense now than he did back then. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Let's get to the next super chat here from Ronnie.
Ronnie says, thank you so much, Ronnie. 38-17 Notre Dame. If they are what I believe they can and should be, they will dominate and they will score late to get the score slightly closer. We must be able to run the ball.
So Ronnie's saying they're going to score late to make it 38-17. NC State's going to score late. I'll say this, Ronnie. Number one, I have 2 responses to what you said. Number one is no team that I have ever seen dominates every single week. They just don't. We talked about this with that 2019 LSU team, Ryan, and I don't know if you've ever gone on the record on this, but to me, that was one of the 2 or 3 best teams I've ever seen in my life, along with is it 95 Nebraska, right? Like, it was a 2001 Miami, right? I mean, it was stupid. Crazy good. 04 USC. Like, it was one of the best teams I've ever seen. But even that year, Ryan, there were games where LSU had to kind of battle through and not playing great football. You needed a 4-quarter game to beat Texas by a touchdown. Texas won 8-5 that year, Ryan. I mean, they lost to TCU by 10 that year. TCU wasn't good. They lost to Iowa State that year. They lost to Baylor that year. And they gave LSU everything they could handle that season. They beat Auburn 23-20. It was a sloppy game. I mean, the offense wasn't playing great. Defense wasn't playing great. I mean, so you're going to have those type of games. The only time I've ever really seen it to where a team in the regular season didn't have that kind of game, the closest thing I could ever find to it, Ryan, was the 2020 Alabama team. And a lot of that had to do with the COVID year, where there were so many anomalies the COVID year. But even then, when they got to the SEC title game, Florida gave them everything they could handle in that game. They were clearly the better team, but Florida played great. You're always going to need weeks where you don't bring your A game, but you got to find ways to win. And this could be that game. It could be. But I'll say this: if Notre Dame dominates NC State the way that you are talking and a lot of others are talking about, I'm going to come out of this game feeling really, really good, because I really like this NC State team. Right? Not that they're going to like a 10-11 win team. I think they're probably an 8-9 win team again, but it's going to be kind of that team where the 3 to 5 losses they get, you're going to have to work to get those wins against them. They're not going to go down without a fight, and that's something that I do like about this team, and they're going to be a lot more dangerous down the year. But if Notre Dame just whoops this team start to finish, that's going to be a really good sign for this team, because they spent most of last year ranked in the top 25, Ryan, right? I mean, it wasn't until all the injuries set in that this team faltered down the stretch. They're going to be a dangerous team once their offense finally gets going.
I agree. You can always count on their defense. Brian Murphy with the Super Chat says, what are your thoughts on Rico Flores Jr.? What is his ceiling for this season? Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate the question, by the way.
Well, I think a ceiling, Ryan, is kind of what we've seen. Here's a crazy stat for you. Do you know who leads the team in targets so far through 2 games? It's Jaden Thomas. Do you know who's
Sure.
This is obviously I'm asking it because of who we're talking about, but do you know that Rico Flores is second on the team in targets? He's been targeted 6 times during the pass game. Now, I think 3 of those came in mop-up minutes, right? He had the one late against Navy and all that, but Rico caught one of the first passes of the game against Tennessee State. So the ceiling is exactly what he is. He's going to be a very important part of the Notre Dame rotation at wide receiver. He gives very good effort in the run game. He's got some technical things to learn in the run game. Ryan, sometimes he'll maybe take not the greatest angle, or maybe overplay a guy and let him get outside or all this stuff. But man, the effort's there. I mean, he battles in the run game. So he's a very important part of the rotation. And I'll say this: if for some reason there's an injury somewhere on the outside and you've got to play him more, okay, all right, let's go. I mean, I really like what I've seen from Rico so far. I do.
Yeah, Rico's rock solid, man. I think Rico's going to be a really, really good football player for Notre Dame long term. Gives me he reminds me a little bit of was TJ Jones. He gives me those kind of vibes, as far as he can win down the field a bit, he can separate, but man, he's just a really crafty football player, and he's just really solid, right? I think that's what kind of Rico gives me those vibes of, man. I think he's gonna be a real good football player for Notre Dame this year. It's just you're battling for consistent reps against guys like Deion Colzie and Tobias Merriweather and Chris Tyree and Jaden Greathouse. It's just the depth of the wide receiver room is greater than what we've seen in recent years at Notre Dame. So I think he's going to be a valuable member, but I really think that long-term he's going to be a very good player for Notre Dame.
Yep. Agree. Let's go to here from our guy, Charlie.
Charlie Weiss's last belt loop, who said something very positive on the message board. I was about to bust his chops a little bit. Charlie, are you kidnapped? But thank you so much for the Super Chat, Charlie. Obviously joking. I can't believe the delusion from NC State fans. I expect Notre Dame to put 40 plus on them, and Sam Hartman adds another skull to his mantle to the Natty. Notre Dame has wide receivers, but NC State really thinks Notre Dame doesn't. LOL.
Well, first of all, right now, Notre Dame fans shouldn't be throwing water about that, because we've got people predicting 52-6 and 49-6 win against NC State, who has won at least 8 games in 5 of the last 6 years. So I think right now, this time of the year, Ryan, all fan bases that don't have any L's on their docket are feeling pretty good about themselves. And I think that's understandable. And honestly, Ryan, I think people are misguided on the Notre Dame receiving core, but I can understand it. I don't think people that are saying, hey, I don't know if the receivers at Notre Dame are all that good, or are like, you guys are insane. What are you guys? I mean, who was the guy that if you were an opponent and you didn't know Notre Dame and you didn't study Notre Dame and you watch as a casual fan, who in the receiving core would you be like, hey, I'm really worried about that guy? That guy
Right.
really scares me, right?
Yeah.
You'd probably have a similar point of view. Now, I think that I'd say, hey, do a little bit more homework, and you might realize these guys are pretty good. I would say that Navy fans probably don't lack respect for Jaden Thomas. I would say that North Carolina fans probably don't have a lack of respect for Jaden Thomas because he made some plays against them last year. But we heard the same thing going into the North Carolina game last year. Remember, man, Notre Dame's receivers are no good. And they played pretty flipping well in that game, right? So, first of all, good. Let them sleep on that group. Let them say, hey, we're going to go one-on-one with those guys all week, because then that gives us a chance to find out who Notre Dame is. But like when you're going into games like this, guys, nobody in college football right now that I have seen is just a complete team right now at this point in time of the season. Everybody's got some flaws.
Right.
And when you're going into a matchup like this, you've got to say, okay, where is this team the weakest where we can maybe take advantage? And right now, if you're looking at the Notre Dame offense, the two positions where you're going to say that group hasn't shown me yet that they should scare me is the Notre Dame receivers and the guards. I think that's a very fair thing for people to say. And on the other side of the ball, it's like, hey, if you can find some ways to get matchups against their safeties, we might be able to do something. Very fair. So I don't know what a lot of other NC State fans have said in regard to what they think they're going to do to win this game, and if Notre Dame sucks and all that. But man, that's what we hear from fan bases all the time. I mean, I remember, Notre Dame's going to get killed by Georgia. They don't have the athlete, blah, blah, blah. Notre Dame can't play with this team. You got people covering Ohio State predicting 35-point wins over Notre Dame last year. And they're going to do the same thing this year, right? They're going to, Notre Dame's going to get blown out. And, and they were just shocked that Notre Dame stayed in that game. And we see it all the time. So I'm not surprised by it. But in this particular case with the receivers, I think the receivers still have a lot of respect they've got to earn right now, Ryan. And hopefully this is the week they do it.
Someone on board at boards@averagebreakdown.com posted a clip of it was Locked On Wolfpack, which obviously covers NC State, and they kind of said the same thing. They're like, I think we'll be able to handle the wide receivers, and people took big offense to that. I'm just like, guys, their best part of their defense is their two starting corners, and Notre Dame's wide receivers still have a lot to prove. So I understand them having that mindset. So
hopefully it's not the same coming out of the game, but I don't think that's a crazy take. Now, if you're like their receivers don't have any talent, there's no athleticism there, like, okay, that's a lazy take.
No,
but if you're like,
they still have to do stuff.
They don't scare me right now. They got a lot to prove. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Hopefully that's just not the case when we're going to play Ohio State in a couple weeks, when they're going to play Ohio State in a couple weeks.
Right.
That it's no longer, they're unproven. We don't know what they can do yet. Hopefully the next couple weeks, we know the answer to that.
Yeah. We had a question from Jay Patterson, said, which is more likely for Notre Dame's defense, 5 sacks or 2 interceptions?
Well, I would say, Jay Patterson, that the one leads to the other, right? The 5 sacks would help lead to 2 interceptions. I would say what's most likely would be two interceptions. Because I think with Brennan Armstrong's escapability, sometimes he may avoid a sack and throw an interception.
Right.
But if they get 5 sacks in this game won't be close. Even if they don't force any interceptions, it won't be close. It won't be close.
I think it's interceptions for me as well, because I think the one thing that Brennan Armstrong has also shown is that he will turn the football over if he is pressured, if he doesn't see the game clearly. So I think it's more likely 5 sacks in a game, 5 or more sacks. That's not easy, man. That's a lot of sacks, man. That's a lot. So 5 sacks tells me that, one, you were able to get a lot of pressure, but also that means that NC State probably dropped back to throw the ball a lot. But so give me the 2 interceptions. I think that's a little bit more likely.
Here's a good one, Ryan. I like this one. This is also from Jay Patterson.
Jay with back-to-backs. So Sam Hartman has had struggles in the past against NC State. What are your stat line predictions for Sam, and what factors will contribute to him having success?
Well, I'm not going to dive too much into the second one because I did a whole segment on yesterday's show about that, Jay Patterson. So I would encourage you. On the front page at irishbreakdown.com, I have an article about this, and I include the segment that I did on the show yesterday. So there's an article titled Sam Hartman's Performance Against NC State Will Say a Lot About Notre Dame. I'm actually going to pull that up now and just link it into the chat. So what I would encourage you to do is read that article, because I talk a lot about what he needs to do, but I also have the segment that I recorded yesterday about that. So I don't want to necessarily rehash that, but a lot of it's going to be, it's not so much what he needs to do. nuts that you're asking that, but it's going to be, what does the supporting cast do? Does the offensive line play well? Do they run the football? Because to address the point Ryan talked about, Notre Dame running the football and all that, NC State beat Wake Forest last year 30-21. NC State ran for 17 yards. Sam Hartman got sacked 4 times. The year before, they ran for 116 yards against NC State in a win, but Sam Hartman had 43 of those yards in a touchdown, rushing touchdown. And then the year before, they ran for 149 yards, but that was on 49 attempts in a game they lost, and he was sacked 6 times in that game. So the other people around him are going to have to step up. His struggles weren't necessarily because he played poorly,
Sure.
but his supporting cast played poorly. So he's going to need more support in that regard. What is the stat line for Sam Hartman? I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this, Ryan. Obviously, I have no clue what a stat line is going to be because I'm not Nostradamus or whatever else, but I'm going to go here. I'm going to go 21 of 33. It's about a 63% completion percentage, right? I'm going to go for 281 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's what I'm going with. Because I think he's going to hit some. I think early on there's going to be some, move the chains, build that up. But I think in the second quarter or in the second half, at some point in time, Notre Dame's going to hit a couple big plays in the pass game. I believe we're going to see that. It could be a screen that goes for big play. It could be over the top. But I just think Notre Dame's going to hit a couple big pass plays in this game.
Yeah.
And so I'm going 21 of 33 for 281 yards and 3 touchdowns. And
Yeah,
he's going to throw.
I think they're going to hit. I think they're going to hit a couple big ones too in this game. I would go 19 of 29 for 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, because I think that the run game will also be working for Notre Dame, so it'll be a little more balanced.
Dig it.
We had a question from Brandon Plensner, who says, does Notre Dame's 2024 matchup with Stanford count as the 5th ACC opponent, therefore leaving room for Notre Dame to schedule any opponent from any conference to fill that home game vacancy?
So we don't have the answer to that yet, Brandon, but Bernard Meir did a podcast, or not a podcast, was asked about this recently. What he said is that the series is going to continue as a non-conference game, as a non-ACC game. So it'll be an out-of-conference game, meaning I don't believe it's going to continue to be part of, like, they're not going to make that, okay, well, you're playing Stanford, you need to add to it. Because now here's what I don't know. What I don't know, Ryan, is are they going to redo the ACC schedule for Notre Dame moving forward now that Cal and SMU are part of it? I don't know the answer to that. I have no idea. But what this, and here's the other part, is Notre Dame does not have Stanford on the schedule beyond 2024. Next year is the last year where they're currently under contract to play. Does that continue? I don't know. Do they go out and renegotiate that contract? Do they make it part of the ACC schedule? Do they continue playing every year? We don't have answers to that because, as far as I know, publicly they have not signed a contract extending it beyond the 2024 season. But if they do sign a contract, it'll be outside of the ACC schedule, which would then make it a completely standalone game that's just treated as a non-conference for them, or not part of the 4 to 5 team deal that Notre Dame's going to have. That's all we know so far.
Will be interesting.
I would like to just be part of just for me, Ryan. I'm sorry, I did bring this up, so I apologize for cutting you off. But I would like to see Stanford no longer be an annual opponent and just be part of, you play them 3-4 times in 10 years as part of the ACC deal. That's what I'd like to see happen. But I doubt that that's going to happen.
Brandon had back-to-back questions. He said, do you think the game being at noon will be beneficial for the team or possibly have a negative effect?
Every team is different when it comes to this, Ryan. They really are. I mean, some teams are just they just at noon, you just don't have enough time to get fired up. They just kind of go through the motions. Some teams come out at noon, man, and they're sharp. It just depends. I mean, to me, I have a feeling this Notre Dame team is going to be good in this type of setting because it is a very Notre Dame does not get enough credit for how experienced they are. Like we keep hearing about, we don't know this, we don't know that, but you've got a 6th-year senior quarterback. You've got a very veteran offensive line now. Even your new guys are juniors. Your receiving core is more experienced this year than it was last year. Sure. Your defensive line has played a lot of football, even though they don't have a ton of starts. Your linebacking core is incredibly experienced. Your secondary is incredibly experienced. Like, this is a very veteran football team. And I have always found that veteran football teams are usually good in any setting, but those noon games where when you get up at here's what I like about noon games and why I'm saying this. Ryan, noon games are because you played a year of division. Did you play that year, your freshman year?
Yeah.
So you almost all D3 games are like noon or 1 o'clock. I mean,
Yeah.
so when you
Yep.
get up in the morning, you're going. It's you go to breakfast. We may do a team mass. You go to the training room. And it's just you're focused on the game the minute you wake up in the morning. Whereas a night game, it's like, okay, you go to team breakfast, but then it's like, okay, now what am I doing for the next 3 hours?
Right.
Right. And you can but the minute you get up and get out of the shower in the morning, dude, it's okay. It's prep time. And veteran teams, I feel, Ryan, tend to be really good in those type of environments.
Yeah.
But that's a tendency based off history. That doesn't mean that this Notre Dame team is going to be that way. If I had to guess, I would assume that they're going to be better off in that type of environment. But then, of course, they went and played Navy in a different continent at 7:30 at night in that continent and played a phenomenal football game. So maybe they're a night team squad. I don't know, but I just have a feeling that a veteran team like this if they can just get up and be football only from the minute they get up, that they're going to be a pretty locked in football team.
It's going to be very interesting because I think there's a lot of layers to this game as well, Brian. I mean, it's your first true away game, right? I mean, not a neutral site game like over in Dublin. It's your first one in someone else's stadium.
With a hostile crowd. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And although I wouldn't necessarily say North Carolina State's the most hostile environment of all time, there's still going to be some heckling that happens, right? There's still going to be some guys that are jawing and doing all that type of stuff. And with the first early game of the season too, there's just a lot of firsts this season for this Notre Dame team. So I think it's almost impossible, Brandon, for me to know that, right? I mean, to Brian's point, like a lot of teams are very different. I tend to believe, based upon what I've seen, that Notre Dame's going to be ready for it, right? Because I just feel like the preparation has been pretty good so far from the Notre Dame team. I feel good about that instance, but we will know at like 12-10 as far as like how well they were ready to go. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those wait and sees because there's a couple firsts. It's not just the first away game. It's not just, first game in a hostile environment. It's not just the first noon game. It's all of those things together, which is going to kind of make it very fascinating to look at.
Yeah, and somebody pointed this out last year. I mean, that was one we heard the same thing last year. When you look at some of the noon games, but I believe this wasn't the Syracuse. We talked about this. Wasn't the Syracuse game a noon game last year?
Was it?
I'm trying. There was a couple. I'm trying to remember when the first noon. It wasn't North Carolina. Somebody in the chat said it was North Carolina. I'm trying to remember what the first noon game was last year. But I remember Notre Dame coming out in that noon game and looking really, really good. And I can't remember who it was against. It was obviously one of the road games, but I thought it was Syracuse. Let me look it up. I could be completely wrong on this, but I thought it was Syracuse. Maybe it was a 3:30 game as well. But the thing is, you just really it was a noon game. It was a noon game, and there was Notre Dame was a 1-point favorite in that game. So, and they came out and Notre Dame set the tone early in that game, Ryan. That game was not as close as the final score indicated, in my opinion, because Notre Dame had some missed opportunities and where they could have put that game away and made it even worse. That game was not as close as the final score showed, in my view. And they were coming off, weren't they just coming off the loss to no, they had just beaten UNLV the week before. That's right. I keep thinking Syracuse came after Stanford.
That was an ugly game though too. With the UNLV game was a pretty ugly game for Notre Dame as well.
Yes, so. Absolutely. All right, let's get to the next question from Justin Horkbrand. I'm going to read this one because I'm going to let you answer this one a little bit. Brian and Ryan, can you describe the type of players that Deuce Knight and Bear Bachmeier are, and who do y'all prefer?
Very different players, style and physically. Deuce Knight is a 6'4.5" long, explosive playmaker, right? Like he has a really explosive arm. He's also an explosive athlete. The kid can run for days. He's got he's got a slightly longer release as a lefty, right? A little bit longer, but he's more of that kind of that vertically oriented player. He can really push the ball, like throwing deep in cuts, throwing the ball down the football field. He's got kind of that explosive arm. He's kind of that playmaker in that sense. Bear Bachmeier is more of like 6'1.5", 220-pound dual threat kid, but he's a gamer dual threat, right? Like he's not going to run as fast as like Deuce Knight does, but he can extend, he can break some tackles. He can work kind of outside the pocket at times, but he's got a really smooth throwing motion on the run, man. He can really throw the football on the run. He's got a compact delivery. I think he's perfect for the modern RPO system. Like, I think that Bear Bachmeier is going to thrive in that type of environment, kind of working off of the run game. Really good quarterback. Who do I prefer? I would say for me, like, I had the choice between two. I'm always a guy that trends towards upside, right? Like, I'm always that guy. And Deuce Knight is that guy for me. He's the guy that I think if you are a good quarterback developer and you put everything together, Deuce Knight is the higher upside compared to Bear. But that is no shot against Bear because I think Bear could be a tremendous football
Yeah,
player.
they're both very good players. And Ryan, I agree. They're both very good players. Who do I prefer? I prefer Deuce. I always prefer the ceiling, and I think Deuce has one of the 2 or 3 highest ceilings of any quarterback in the country. Now he's a ways away from being there, right? He needs a lot more work than some of those other quarterbacks as well, but his ceiling is enormous. I mean, you could even see it. To me, some people were down on his first couple games, and I'm like, but those games actually showed me the potential he has. Because when
I thought he was good against IMG, man.
Yeah.
I was really happy with that performance.
But I'm like, just some of the throws he makes, you're like, dude, there just aren't a lot of people that can throw that ball off their back foot and do that.
No.
You know, it was really impressive. And but either one's a win. But if you had to tell me which quarterback would I prefer, would I put all the chips in the table for? It's Deuce, especially a year after CJ, because if Deuce takes a little bit of time to develop, you're okay. You've got Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr. You're fine.
Exactly.
Right. But if he hits, he's special. He's got a chance to really be special. Ryan, I was on the board real quick, just checking a couple things, and I went to the article, the podcast link, because I was going to put the link to the message board thing on there. And we're talking about predictions. There was a comment in there that I absolutely loved from Michael A. on the message board. Yeah. And it was a response to, Sam Hartman's going to, needs to do. And he said, Hartman is going to carve these turkeys up just before the holiday season starts. I can feel it. I thought that was such a great quote.
Is it already almost the holiday season, man?
Yeah. Yeah. He's going to carve these turkeys up just before. I just thought that was great. That was a great comment, by the way.
I hope he's right.
Awesome. Me too.
He's right.
Me too.
Ray Hallcraft says, again, Sam Hartman, NC State dropped 8 to cut off. Sorry, against Sam Hartman, NC State dropped 8 to cut off passing lanes and make it more difficult. This is difficult against Notre Dame, who can run the ball. What disguised looks does NC State show when dropping 8?
I don't think that they're going to drop 8 a whole lot against Notre Dame, other than third and long situations. And I don't think they didn't drop 8 a ton last year, but they did do it. It would be more about they could just drop guys from levels 1 and 2 last season, and they could disguise their corners and roll their corners more because they needed to get into those intermediate zones and try to force the ball down the field. And the reason they wanted to force the ball down the field is because they didn't think Sam Hartman was going to have enough time to be in the pocket long enough to throw the ball down the field. And for the most part, they were correct. He didn't have the time to throw the ball down the field. And so the pressure last year sped up his processes and caused him to not see some of those guys dropping. And that's why protecting the quarterback. I mean, Ryan, you saw the first pick, like he threw it, hit the guy right in the chest. He didn't see that guy. He's throwing a crossing route thinking my guy's got that guy beat by 5 yards. I'm throwing this crossing route. He doesn't see it. I think it was a corner just standing right there because they had disguised the coverage. And that's why it's so important that they are able to run the football and protect him. So he doesn't feel that need to speed up his process because of the pressure coming. And that's going to be a big part of it. So really the big thing is it's not even just about, a lot of those different, it's not about the disguises and those type of things as much as it's going to be about the protection that he has. Because if you're disguising coverages, but I have time to throw, I'm going to pretty quickly figure out where you're going.
Right.
Because I'm going to be able to keep my eyes on that second level. But as soon as even the best quarterbacks, right, as soon as I have to move around, even if I'm doing a good job of keep my eyes downfield, it's harder for me to have the same vision that I have when I'm just sitting back in the pocket. But they'll do a lot of different things, bringing guys up, dropping second level guys, bringing a safety pressure, dropping a linebacker underneath that kind of that hook curl zone. If you're going to try to throw a slant to beat the safety pressure or a glance or a quick post, they may have another safety rolling from the backside. They may have a linebacker kind of coming from inside out on that type of route. It's going to be things like that. Corner plays off and squats, that kind of thing. They do a decent amount of that, because they play. Would you say this is they play a lot of, they mix up their coverage as well between zone and man, but they play their man out of zone looks. Does that make sense, Ryan?
Like match coverages. Yeah.
It's hard to tell when they're playing man and when they're playing zone based on how they line up at the snap. And I think they do a pretty good job of that. But the good news is, I mean, Sam Hartman's seen this a lot. That's the other thing is, I mean, he's faced every defense he's faced at NC State's been a Tony Gibson defense. Now
Right.
it's kind of like he's going to have a little bit more support, and that's going to be the key.
Sam Hartman's a 6-year player. He's seen every variation of coverage, every different look, pre and post snap that you're going to throw at him. The major way that a coverage disguise is going to hurt Sam Hartman is if there's pressure that is also initiated there, right? Like to your point, is if Sam Hartman has clear vision and has a stable process, he'll be able to get through his reads still. But the worst part, and NC State does do this sometimes. This is where you get guys in trouble. You disguise something, and all of a sudden Tanner Engel comes off the slot and hits you in the face as a safety blitz, and you didn't see it, and it's disguised, and all of a sudden a linebacker is dropping into his vacated zone, and you didn't see it, right? So it's not just about mixing and matching coverages, confusing post snap. It's also about getting pressure. If NC State's not able to get pressure, then it doesn't matter what coverage you're trying to hide, in my opinion.
Yep, agree. It's the speeding up of the processes. That's the key. And that's exactly what we said about the key for Brendan Armstrong. If you let him sit in the pocket and get comfortable, he's going to have success. I don't care who the receivers are. Same thing for Sam Hartman. And Sam Hartman's better than Brendan Armstrong, and he's got better weapons, we think, than Brendan Armstrong. Yes. So if you give him time, he'll have success. And to Ryan's point, I don't care what you're disguising, because a disguised coverage, if I have time, can actually hurt you more than it's going to hurt me. Because if I have pressure and I can see it and read it, I know, okay, to your point, Ryan, about the experience, I can bang this corner route because that safety is not going to be able to get over there in time to defend this route because I have time to throw. Yep. And so, it really makes it more challenging at times if the quarterback has time to throw the football. And that's going to be a key to me in this game.
Agree. Irish Gordian Knott, what's up, IGK? Can you compare and contrast the USC and North Carolina State offenses? They're both run-first air raids with mobile quarterbacks that have big arms. Obviously, USC has better talent, but how else do they differ?
I don't believe that they're both run-first air raids. I would not describe it that way. They both strive for balance, but Lincoln Riley has a far better track record of running the football than Robert Anae does. Robert Anae likes to run the football more than most air raids, but his numbers in the run game are more similar to what we see from other air raid teams than it is to what Lincoln Riley did at Oklahoma, for example. So I would not call them run first. Really what it comes down to, Ryan, is they're both, the biggest similarities is they're both going to be about spacing. And to me, that's the biggest thing about the air raid. It's spacing. It's spreading teams out. It's getting guys in isolations. It's using your pre-snap and the alignments, and then also using post-snap movements to try to create openings. A lot of time in air raids, you're actually doing all these things to get one guy open, right? I mean, that's what a lot of this stuff does. And then you have some built-in checkdowns if that one guy doesn't get open. But they're not super complicated reads, because all the stuff that they're doing, it's designed to create this post-snap switch that gets this guy open on this seam route or whatever the case may be. And so I'd say Robert Anae is more close to a traditional air raid than what Lincoln Riley is. But we're at the point now where with the air raid, where we're talking principles, not air raid. It's like the West Coast. There came a point in time where it's like you're watching the West Coast offense, and I'm like, yeah, John Gruden's a West Coast coach. Mike Shanahan's a West Coast coach. The older Mike Shanahan, but Mike Shanahan's offense, and even his son, does not look anything like, in a lot of ways, what John Gruden's doing, even though they're both West Coast guys. And that's where we're at the air raid, Ryan, is they're really not all similar, with the exception of just the overarching philosophy, which is about space, getting guys in space and trying to create wins in those type of situations. And those are going to be the keys. Those are going to be. I have to say something here. Yeah. Charlie, you're going to lose this battle if you're going to try to tell people that Bear Bachmeier is a better prospect at the same stage of his development as Tyler Buchner. You're just going to lose that battle. Okay, Tyler Buchner had 81 touchdowns as a junior in college, right? Or junior high school. Sophomore. I understand junior. Yeah. I understand that we're now projecting what we saw from Tyler Buchner at Notre Dame, but can we not act like we saw Tyler Buchner for like a whole season and he was bad? Can we just not ignore the fact that Tyler Buchner was pretty freaking good the last time we saw him play in a Notre Dame uniform? What I can't stand is when a guy comes to Notre Dame and maybe doesn't pan out. And then we do this like revisionist history thing of, well, he wasn't good here, so he wasn't a good prospect. If that's just, let's be better than that as fans, right? Tyler Buckner was a phenomenal prospect. Everybody thought Tyler Buckner was a very big time prospect. It wasn't that long ago, like going into last year, that everybody was like, bench Jack Cohn, play Tyler Buckner, right? And so, yeah, it didn't work out great for him in his first 2 starts of his sophomore year. And now we're just ready to throw him up. Let's not do that, man. Because if you're going to sit there and try and tell me that Tyler Buckner's not even close to the prospect Bear Bachmeier is a quarterback, a kid who's been playing quarterback for like what, a year, you're going to lose credibility when it comes to having this conversation. Okay, we can say Tyler Buckner didn't pan out at Notre Dame. That's very fair to say. But to act as if he was not an outstanding high school football player and a tremendous prospect is really just I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it because I do love Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. It's just, it makes us look like the fan bases that we criticize, right? It does. It's like, let's just say I was like this big idiot and I was on TV and I said something stupid like this, Ryan, hypothetically, of course. Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman wouldn't be in the top 2 at LSU, and then act like I didn't even say it after the game and start talking about how, well, that was a good team. They had 2 first-round draft picks on their at wide receiver. Well, you just got done. You know what I mean? Like, let's not be that fan base where we do that. So if you weren't criticizing Tyler Buckner at the time, then I don't want to hear it now. I really don't. And he's not here anymore. Okay. So, I get tired of that because Tyler Buckner was an outstanding high school prospect. And Tyler Buckner was a pretty good football player at Notre Dame in 2021. Right. And yeah, he didn't play well in his first 2 starts, but he played pretty dang well in his last start. That was one of the most, so if you actually look at the numbers, I should go grab the media guide now. That was one of the best offensive performances Notre Dame has ever had in a bowl game. I think it was top 5 all time in points and yards in a bowl game. And Tyler Buckner had a big part of that, right? Yeah, it's some turnovers. Yeah, it's part of the learning process. But let's just not do this whole revisionist, Bear Bachmeier is a way better prospect than Tyler Buckner. No, he isn't. Because that's exactly the comparison that I like to use for Bear Bachmeier is Tyler Buckner. And that's a compliment because Tyler Buckner's a talented kid. Just injuries, there's a lot of circumstances that hurt it. He made some poor decisions on his own. But let's not act like Tyler Buckner was this bum and everybody thought he was a bum and he wasn't a good quarterback and all this other kind of stuff. Just stop. The kid threw for over 4,000 yards, rushed for over 1,600 yards, and had over 81 touchdowns. I don't care who you're playing against in high school. That's phenomenal, right? And so let's just not be that fan base. Okay? I just can't stand that. So anyway, Ryan, I had to go there, man. I had to go there. Sorry. I just saw what was going on in the chat and I was like, nah, man, we're not doing this.
Question from PA_Irish guy. From what you have seen from the offense so far, what do you think the opposing D will try to take away first, and what will that open up? I mean, they're going to try to stop the running game early on, in my opinion, right? So will that take away? If they're able to stop the running game, play action is not going to be quite as effective. RPO game is not going to be quite as effective. I mean, Notre Dame's going to have to kind of strive for balance, and I think that getting a run game going is really going to accentuate the pass game, or vice versa. I think that those things play off of each other, obviously. So I think that they're definitely going to try to stop this run game and make Notre Dame one-dimensional as a passing attack early. Mm-hmm. Joe Papini with a super chat. Thank you, Joe. Says, hi, fellas. Hello. 45-10 Irish. I see Hartman getting into rhythm early and the run game finishing off the Wolfpack D late with 2 long touchdowns to Tobias.
I'd love to see that. To see that. That would be the kind of breakout, like going into future weeks, that Tobias needs, honestly. And then Sam Hartman needs to kind of build that confidence in Tobias. Absolutely. I would love to see that.
Connor Grant with a super chat as well. Thank you, Connor. If Notre Dame is to rise to the top as a program, should Notre Dame win by 3+ scores? 3+ scores? Georgia, Alabama wouldn't be sweating this game. We need confidence. Where are Notre Dame?
I mean, I'm sorry. I just can't go there with you. Let's not, I'm trying to be nice today.
Well, it just happens
Connor,
every year to some teams. I mean, like Georgia struggled with Missouri last year. Alabama struggled with Texas A&M last year. Like
yeah,
sometimes you
thank
just don't
you.
play well
Thank
against
you.
not great
Guys,
teams. I mean,
Georgia had to come back to beat Missouri, who
yes,
is not as good as NC State. If you want to play the transitive property game, NC State convincingly beat Wake Forest. Wake Forest beat Missouri. Missouri took Georgia down to the wire, right? Like, I just got done breaking down how LSU did in 2019 against an 8-5 Texas team. What was NC State's record last year? 8-5, right? Like, and here's the other thing: Georgia and Alabama, last I checked, have won a lot of titles recently. Notre Dame hasn't. Notre Dame has not proven to be that team yet. So showing reverence and respect for an opponent shouldn't Notre Dame win this game by 3 scores? No, they shouldn't win this game by 3 scores. Can they? Yes. Should they? No. They just need to win. That's the key. You're not going to go out there, guys, and no team does this. Georgia doesn't do this. Alabama doesn't do this. Nobody does this. You don't go out there and dominate every team that you play every single week because you're Georgia or whatever. I mean, Ryan, and you mentioned the game earlier against Missouri. Do we
yeah,
remember the Kentucky game last year with Georgia? What the score
yeah.
was of that game? The 16-6 game or this that they won against Georgia, right? I mean, look, guys, Iowa beat Kentucky more convincingly last year than Georgia did. That's part of the game. The key is you go on the road against a good football team and you win. Now, can Notre Dame beat NC State convincingly? Yes, they can. But we just need to be able to say, hey, Notre Dame's the better football team. Is there
Yep.
any disagreement there, Ryan? No,
No.
they're not. But going on the road and against a good Power 5 team is not a game where I'm expecting them to win by 21 plus. And if they don't, I'm disappointed because that's how you get into a game where you win 35-20 and you get into the post-game show and people are complaining the whole time because they didn't win by 40. Well, the problem was never Notre Dame. The problem was you had unrealistic expectations that didn't show enough reverence for the fan base, which is what Notre Dame fans are always complaining that other teams do to Notre Dame. Oh, they
Right.
don't respect us. They think they're just going to kick our butts and then they're surprised. Well, how about we not be that and say, hey, this is a game where Notre Dame has a chance to go out there and look really good. And if they can win this game to Connor's point, if they can win by 3+ scores, that is a heck of a win. A heck of a win. Not a, well, I should have done that. No, that's a heck of a win. And if they do that, I'll be fired up because this is a good football team. But if they win by 10 or 7 or 14, that's still a really good win, especially this early in the season, Ryan. So I think we need to show a little bit more respect for who NC State is because you can still respect your opponent and say, yeah, we're going to go, but hey, I respect you. You guys do a great job, but we're still going to go out there and give you these, right? We're going to hand something to you. We're going to give you
Yeah.
something, right? And it's when you start disrespecting your opponent is when you go into games thinking you're just going to roll over them. And then you get punched in the mouth and you're not
Sure.
ready to respond. So I would hope that Notre Dame has a little bit more respect for who NC State is, the team, than what we have shown this week, in my view. So that's my rant on that one. But I still do appreciate the super chat.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Here's an interesting one, Ryan.
Archer says Caleb Williams' dad said he may come back to USC we're doing this one next year to avoid going to the Cardinals. Do you think we might see some more big names stay a 4th year with NIL bad draft landing possibilities?
Let me give my stance on this, Ryan, because
Yep.
to me, this is smart for him to be talking about. I mean, I wish he wasn't talking about it now. I think the timing of it's a problem. Like, bro, we're 2 games into the season. Can you hold off a little bit on this? Can we wait till we get like into the between bowl games, we have these conversations. We're not even close to that. But I've got no problem with him doing that because we've seen this before. I mean, I can't tell you all that I'm a huge John Elway fan and then come down on Caleb Williams for doing this because you are Caleb Williams. You have earned the right to be in a position to say, hey, I don't want to go there. I don't want to be part of that losing franchise because you could say, well, because here's what the counter will be. Well, look, you need to take the money now. What if you get hurt and all that kind of stuff? And I understand all that, but this kid's already made millions of dollars. And if he comes back for a senior year, he's going to make millions of more dollars. Do I think he's coming back for senior year? No, Ryan, I don't think there's any chance he's going to come back for senior year. But why give up that leverage right now when you're trying to position to say, hey, depending on who that number 1 pick is, I may not come back. I think it's a silly thing to be talking about from a timing standpoint, simply from a
Yeah.
timing standpoint. If he made this same comment in November, December, when we have an idea that Team A that sucks at developing quarterbacks and has a head coach that quarterbacks don't want to play for looks like they're going to have the number one pick, which is exactly what John Elway's problem was. I don't want to play for Frank Kush. You know what I mean? Like then I would have a little bit more understanding of, okay, I get why you're doing it. So my issue with what Caleb Williams' dad is doing, Ryan, is not so much him using that leverage and that NIL presents, because if there's no NIL, you're like, dude, you're not coming back for a senior year. Just shut up. But now with a kid like Caleb Williams, he's going to make millions of dollars. He does have that leverage. So I would say use it. I just think you fired that bullet a little bit too early. That's my whole thing, because you have no clue who the number one pick is going to be right now. So that would be my thing. Is I think it was ill-advised from a timing standpoint, but overall, I have no issue with this strategy because you have that leverage. So why not use it? We saw Eli Manning, Archie Manning do it. We saw Jack Elway do it with his son, who guys that were considered like kind of locks to be the number one overall pick. So you have the leverage, try and use it. It's just now is probably not the time to do that, because like who's trading up for the number one pick right now? Who are you trying to convince to trade up to take your kid that you like? You have no clue who's going to have the number one pick. No clue.
Yeah.
So I'd say the timing of it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, even though the strategy is completely fair, in my opinion. Makes sense.
We hear this stuff every single year to start out with. I'm not sure if I'm going to declare or not. I'm not sure. And yeah, the NIL conversation, that makes it a little bit more legitimate. So I understand why people are talking about it. I understand. And I'm sure there's going to be some players that decide to make that decision.
Yep.
But I still don't think for the most part it's going to be the guys that are considered to be the number one overall picks in those drafts, ultimately. I'll put it like this. I never talk in absolutes in the NFL draft space because things are very volatile and things change all the time. I would be shocked if Caleb Williams came back for a senior year. I would be absolutely shocked. Absolutely not surprised. I would be shocked. If he wants the leverage battle, he can leverage the Cardinals into making a deal either before the draft or after the draft to put him where he kind of wants to be, right? He can make that happen if he really wanted to. It's very easy. You already have a disgruntled quarterback that you don't really like in the Cardinals, right? You don't want two issues in the same building. This is a non-conversation for me at this point. I would be shocked if Caleb Williams was playing college football in 2024.
Agree. I do think, however, that we're going to see more guys like him use this as a talking point. I just think future guys that are going to use this as a talking point will be a little smarter about the timing of when they use it. Because there comes a point in time, Ryan, where you don't have that timing anymore because you have to declare, right? So you can't do that. You can't, because it's also kind of like, hey, I'm going to use this to see if I can get this team that we don't want to draft my kid to budge on this, right?
Right.
And, so like John Elway's situation was unique because even after he declared, he still had a bit of leverage. And it was, I'm just going to go play for the Yankees. Caleb Williams doesn't have that. So once he declares, his leverage is gone to as far as using that threat. He's got other things he can do, to your point, but that particular threat is kind of gone. But the reality of a guy like him in the NIL universe is that he can say, you realize I could make more money next year, because he's going to put himself off a year from his rookie contract. That's true. But you know what else hurts a second contract? Going to a franchise that's going to waste your time and your talent, right?
Sure.
And development. But the other part is like, I'm going to make more next year as a senior at USC than I'm going to make as on a rookie contract, right? You get that, right? Like that's the leverage thing that you can also say, whether that's true or not, right? It's just, but use it before you declare because you have the leverage, but you just don't use it on September 6th. That's my problem, Ryan, because you have no clue who the number one pick is going to be.
I've been told that Caleb Williams' dad, I believe, is a lawyer. So, it's just going to be leveraged throughout this entire process.
And
so we're going to hear about this constantly.
I'm truly okay. It's like one of those things. I want to repeat this. I am perfectly fine with him using this as in leverage in these negotiations. Perfectly fine with it.
Yeah.
But as a lawyer, you have to, it's the same thing. You have this evidence, or you have this argument, or there's a time and a place to use it. Now, obviously, there's legalities to, I'm not talking about disclosure and all that. I'm just saying, like, there's got to be some strategy to when you're going to use this. When NFL teams have played a combined 0 football games in the regular season is not the time to be talking about that, in my opinion. Unless he's just kind of floating that out there now, then let it go away and then bring it back in December. Okay, we'll see. That might make sense. But right now, it's just like, guy, no one's listening to that right now in the NFL because nobody has a clue who's going to be number one. The only thing I could think of is he's saying, like, hey, Cardinals, before you think about tanking, just keep in mind that my kid ain't coming for you.
They're already tanking.
Right?
They're starting quarterbacks Josh Dobbs.
So that could be the thing, Ryan, that maybe that's why he's saying it now. Maybe.
Yeah.
Because he's letting you know, like, hey, you can tank all you want, but you're going to be tanking for Drake May, not my son. So
that program right now is a dumpster fire. The Cardinals. It is not a great situation. They got Jonathan Gannon as their head coach, who's one of the weirdest people I've ever seen in my entire life. So it's gonna be fun watching Arizona in the next couple of years.
Yep, I did like the fact that he said that he took ownership of the Super Bowl. Like, we lost because of me. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we all knew that, but like, you know.
Did you hear him try to pump up the fans though? It was pretty. His players in the meeting room. It was cringy.
There are way too many young guys getting NFL jobs because they're really smart that just aren't head coaches right now. Like, it's just not a great situation.
I don't even think he's that smart, to be honest. But
perception wise. But the Cardinals are. I kind of got the feeling like that they hired him to be the sacrificial lamb, to go be bad, and then
it was great because he's the defensive coordinator for a good defense that just went to the Super Bowl, and every Eagles fan ever after they made the announcement, they're like, yes, thank God.
Yep.
We had a question from Jay Henry. What's up, Jay? Do you think Al Golden holds back on the blitzing in this game or decides to heat up Armstrong?
I think that's just who Al Golden is right now, honestly. I mean, if you felt the need to heat up Tennessee State, then you're going to need to heat up Brennan Armstrong. Especially early downs, Ryan, because a lot of crashing to shut down the run game is what I think we'll see. But I hope he's strategic. I want to look, Ryan. I like aggressive defensive coordinators. I do. I just think sometimes you're aggressive just for the sake of it. There's like, you know what I mean? Like, do we really need to do that at that situation or against this opponent? I would imagine he's going to try to heat up Armstrong, but I think we're also going to see a lot of run stunts early too, Ryan, because I really do believe they're going to try to completely dominate the line of scrimmage, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that as long as it's sound. I can live with it. Against this opponent, I can live with it because I don't think you have the receivers that can really do the damage to you that Ohio State's can if you try to get too aggressive against them, or what USC's can or other teams can. And Brennan Armstrong's a good runner, but he's not Caleb Williams either. He's he's not that guy either.
Right. Man, I made a mistake of reading someone talking in the chat, and it's just
I keep telling you, man, this is why you turned it off.
So someone said who would want Caleb Williams? It's like, if Notre Dame needs a quarterback next year, I'll take Caleb Williams. Like whatever. Archer 452, Coach Prime has shown the ability to land big commitments at skill position. Travis Hunter, Cormani McLean, Dylan Edwards, etc. If he can land Bryce Underwood, will that be catalyst to improve line recruiting?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. Big time. Get some big offensive linemen in Texas, some kids out in California. Absolutely. I mean, look, Deion Sanders is going to attract players to a certain degree, but if you can put him with a big name quarterback, that would be huge. That would be huge. Yep, absolutely. I'd like to see that, Ryan, personally. I'd like to see that. I've said this before. I'm rooting for Deion to win at Colorado because I want more teams to rise up to start taking players away from – look, if Deion Sanders is everything that he says he's going to be at Colorado, he's going to take more guys from Bama, Georgia, and LSU than he is from Notre Dame.
I think one of his first commits that he got in 2024 was the Omar White kid. That's the Florida defensive tackle, right? I mean, so he's going to dip into those pipelines as well.
Yep.
Seek and destroy. How do you measure a quarterback prospect's ability to process information quickly and his will and spirits? A prospect's physical ability is only part of the equation. Thank you.
Well, number one, it's a good question. You watch the film and you see how consistently he's able to get throws out, right? So part of it is just the basics of the timing of the throw. So an example, Ryan, is the pass that Sam Hartman threw to Chris Tyree last week. If Sam Hartman doesn't read that as quickly as he does, he may hit Chris Tyree, but Chris Tyree's going out of bounds the moment he catches the football because he waited on it, or maybe gives time the defense to rally. He got there. It's same thing on that corner route to Mitchell Evans. I mean, as soon as Mitchell put his foot in the ground, Sam Hartman knew where the ball was going to, and he got it out there quickly. So that's a big part of it. You just watch it, and you can see that the ball gets out quickly. And then you also can usually tell on game film when a quarterback is going off of his first read. You can just tell the way his feet work, the way he's moving his head. You know, if a quarterback just goes through his drop and he's staring at one guy and he drops back, hits his top drop, gathers, throws the ball, and he never takes his eyes off that one read, he threw off his first read, right? But sometimes you'll see a guy, you know, Ryan, I'm trying to think what play it was. There was a play against Navy where Sam Hartman, I mean, it was very clear he was going to his secondary or third read on the particular play because his eyes are here. He's going through it. He comes here, and then bam, he comes back and he makes that throw. So you see those kind of things, and it really just comes down to how quickly the ball is getting out. And so when I talk about a guy that's not a good processor, like Will Levis, for example, I said he was really bad at processing, is because he was just constantly late throwing the football. And you could just tell when he was going through his reads, he was just not a guy that was overly confident going off of his first read. He just wasn't. And he would force a lot of bad balls, and he would make throws. This is another way you know a guy's making not really good at processing. He makes throws where you're like, did you not see that guy standing there? Like every quarterback makes those throws. Tom Brady made a throw like that in the AFC Championship game in 2015 against the Broncos, and Von Miller picked him off. Everybody's going to make those throws. Sam Hartman made one against NC State last year. But when you see it all the time, it tells me this guy's not good at processing information. Like Ian Book to me was also not great at processing reads, which is why he was so uncomfortable throwing the ball down the field. Because a guy that's not really good at processing reads is not going to be real comfortable throwing the ball down the field unless the down the field throw is his first read, right? And so those are things that I see that are part of it. As far as will and spirit, it's just how a guy plays the game. I mean, when you watch Max Duggan last year, I don't have to be able to put my finger and explain it, but you just see it and you're like, that kid plays with a lot of heart. Yeah. It just, I mean, your offensive linemen in the Big 12 championship game are like picking him off the ground and like helping him back to the huddle. And what does he do the next play? He runs the ball in for a touchdown. You know, it's like, I mean, and it's also the other thing you can know is when a guy's got that kind of will and spirit, you're going to see how his teammates react to him in certain ways. Yep. That you're like, okay, they see this guy and everything he's given to this team, and they're like, he's raised their bar, and that tells you a lot. Like I still remember of all the success Byron Leftwich had in college, the one thing I'll remember is that dude dropping back, throwing a ball, and then his linemen come back and they carry him to the next play, and then he lines up and throws it again. Right? It's like Kurt Schilling, man. Kurt Schilling was a phenomenal pitcher, won like 3 World Series. But what are we always going to remember about Kurt Schilling? That game against the Yankees with the blood. Does anyone remember what Kurt Schilling did in the World Series against the Cardinals? No. They remember what he did in game 6 of the in ALCS when he's had just recently had surgery. He's got the scar. He's got bleeding. He's got all that. But he went out there and he was a warrior, right? Your teammates see that and they respond to you certain ways when you're that kind of guy. So it's not even just about how you evaluate the quarterback. It's how you evaluate how his teammates respond and react to him. Brady Quinn had that, right? You could just see it. But you could also see how Deshaun Kaiser's teammates reacted to him, and you didn't see it. You saw how Notre Dame's teammates, how Tony Rice's teammates reacted to him. You saw how Jarius Jackson's teammates reacted to him. You even, to a degree, saw how Ian Book's teammates reacted to him. Now, Ian wasn't great at processing, but that was a hard worker that gave you everything he got, and his teammates loved him for it, right? But then you look at guys like Jimmy Clausen and you look at guys like Deshaun Kaiser, and they didn't have that same type of reaction from teammates, and it tells you a lot about how they were viewed. And it comes down to this.
That's why NFL scouts spend months going to school and not just talk to the players, but they talk to their teammates, they talk to their coaches, they talk to the cafeteria people, they talk to the strength and conditioning coaches, they talk to everyone. They want to know what makes a player tick, right? And that's kind of the that's the behavior aspect behind scouting that we don't talk about enough because it's not readily available to us at all
Right.
times, right? From the media perspective.
Right. It was done and look, I think Draft Day I like that movie. It was cheesy, but it's an entertaining. But they tried to portray that in that movie, Ryan, and they did it in a little bit of a kind of a weird, cheesy way, and they tried to incorporate it all in like a matter of like 3 hours.
Yeah.
But everything about that game was about trying to find out if this kid has the heart to build your team. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of
Yeah.
leader is he? Does he have that heart? Does he have, and it was never about, like, this guy's a great prospect. He has this number, that stat. He does this, that, and the other thing. But it was always about, how does he handle when he gets pressured?
Yeah.
Do his teammates like him? It was done in a little bit of a cheesy way, but it really was one of the most true things of that movie. Is you're investing a number one pick in this quarterback. You're trying to find out a whole lot more than just what kind of arm does he have, what kind of 40 time does he have. You're like, is this a guy that I can build my franchise around? I know the talent, but what about the other stuff? Is that something I can build around? And that's true of quarterback as much as more than it is, in my opinion, any other position on the team.
The worst part of that movie, because I watch it annually before the draft, the worst part of that movie is that the number one overall pick was supposed to be a quarterback from Wisconsin. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure it was.
Yeah. 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 And the game action that was not, because like some of the clips in that, they actually used real game clips.
Yeah.
But the ones like when, what was his name?
Alvin Mack.
Alvin Mack
right?
was from the program.
It's something Mack though, right? Vontae Mack.
Yes. No matter what. And the scene where he picks up the ball and runs it in, I'm like, oh my God, he's going so slow. Like, this is so lame. Like, it's really bad. Really bad. Yeah, Vontae, no matter what. But no, that's the stuff that you're trying to find out, right? Is what does this guy have on the inside? I know what he can do with throwing football. That's fine. I mean, Kyle Buller had one of the biggest arms I've ever seen in my life. It's a terrible quarterback, right? I mean, it doesn't. Will Levis has an incredibly powerful arm. He's not a very good quarterback, in my opinion. And the fact he got beat out by Malik Willis is evidence of that, in my opinion. Let's move on to this last one, Ryan, and then we're going to get out of here.
Okay. Brandon Plesner says, Ryan, do you think Riley Leonard will enter the NFL draft following the season, or do you think he could return? I'm looking for a possible 1-year rental at quarterback.
Why would he leave Duke?
Yeah.
It's a different situation. He's not in a system that he needs to leave in order to be recognized. But yes, if Riley Leonard wants to look at Notre Dame next year, Ryan, I would take that call. I would take that call.
I would take that call as well. As far as the NFL draft, it's so early, Brandon. Like, it really depends on what the depth of the class looks like. Like, I think that it's very highly likely that Caleb Williams and Drake May are obviously in the draft. After that, who's the next quarterback? It's the conversation of, can Bo Nix take another step forward? Is Shedeur Sanders real? Is JJ McCarthy real? One of those, is Riley Leonard that guy that's going to continue to take that momentum forward? The secondary options in the quarterback class after the top two are a little bit questionable right now as far as like who's going to be the next picking order. Could it be Michael Penix? Could it be Shedeur Sanders? Could it be Riley Leonard? Could it be Bo Nix? Like, it's just a little bit open-ended right now. So I really think it depends on what this number 3 quarterback through number 10 quarterback, like what that eventually looks like, what the landscape truly looks like. Because if Riley's in the top 5, I think probably he ends up coming out because he's still probably going to be a first-round draft pick, right? And I think that he's shown massive improvements. So I really think it depends on what the hierarchy looks like because he is a third-year player. I believe he's going to be graduated at the end of December as well, which is obviously a big thing because I believe he early enrolled. So I think he'd graduate in 3.5 years. So with that understanding of like he'll probably have his degree in hand, and if he's considered one of the top 3 to 4 quarterbacks in the 2024 NFL draft, I think it's probably likely, but anything's possible at this point. Like I actually absolutely have no idea.
And with a lot of these guys, it's one game, right? I've seen a ton of overreactions from fans after one game this past weekend. I also want to point out too, Ryan, when you look at Riley Leonard, I just want to remind people that the first person you heard talk about Riley Leonard was that guy right there. right? I still remember getting those text messages from you during the Temple game. And I'm like, first of
Yeah.
all, why are you watching Duke and Temple? That was my first thought. But
Oh man,
yeah.
Archer's about to get blocked in the chat too. Talking about Joe Milton. Stop that,
Oh
man.
no.
Stop the Joe
Hey,
Milton stuff,
dude, look,
please.
man, if Will Levis
Please.
can be a second round pick, Joe Milton can be a second round pick. All
Ugh.
right. That's all I'm gonna say. So we'll see. We'll
Oof.
see how it goes. Yeah, I'm gonna bring that up one for you. There, Ryan. There you go.
It's gross, man.
That's
I actually
that's
watched
the
a
hot
little bit of
NFL
his
draft pick.
game, and despite him having the strongest arm we've ever seen, he throws nothing but screens. It's fantastic. It's
I
awesome.
was watching part of that game, and at one point they're like, "Yeah, it's like deep into the game, he'd only completed like one pass beyond 10 yards in that game." I was like,
My favorite thing about Joe Milton ever is that he has one of the best deep arms ever, except during the game when it matters. He literally got benched because he kept missing deep balls early in the 2022 season or 2021 season. Like that's the reason he got benched.
yeah. I love this
But
comment from Zai Buford. Don't block our Archie.
oh, is
We're not
that
gonna
Archie Manning? Is that
we're
Archie
not gonna
Manning this
block
weekend?
Archer. We're not gonna block him.
Yeah.
We love Archer. We're just giving him a hard time.
Yeah.
So no, that's our dude. All right, Ryan, that's gonna do it for today, man. Why don't you take us out of here?
Yeah, we appreciate everyone for joining us today. Again, if you missed the keys to victory or game predictions in the first section of this podcast, make sure to go back and listen. Before you leave this mailbag section, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell. IB Nation Sports Talk tonight, and then tomorrow, myself and Brian Driscoll will be back at 1 o'clock Eastern Time for the weekly Friday free-for-all mailbag to get you all set for the noon game on Saturday. Notre Dame heading down to Raleigh, North Carolina to take on the NC State Wolfpack. So go sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you again very, very soon here on the Irish Breakdown podcast.